places, they are working in collusion to destabilize places like Panama. By the way, I've written 3 books on Chinese information war. Unfortunately, they're only in Japanese. They're not even in English because I've been working for many years now to wake up the Japanese to this problem. The Japanese are under direct attack that has serious implications for us, not to mention the Japanese who have no food security. They create only about 10% of their own food. And that food depends greatly on inputs of nitrogenous fertilizers, which are under attack right now. I think, this is Idaho. I'm in Texas, but I think you don't need to be told about the farming issues, right? So these human osmotic pressures, the push and the pull of migration, one of the things that creates high osmotic pressure is food shortages or just high food prices, right? We see right now stores are being looted in Argentina. This has been happening in places like Ecuador. These situations are developing, and this human osmotic pressure is being coupled with the increase in the routes. We're developing the routes more. Just today, I got word from Panama, there's a new route to the Darien Gap. Now it only takes a day and a half, maybe 2 days if you're not in shape, right? This is a big deal for us. You can have millions, there's already millions of people coming through the gap, right? We've had about 6,000 in one of the camps 72 hours ago, right? Inside of Panama, right? This is bringing a lot of diseases. It's going to affect everybody in the United States. I've been warning about this for years, as have some veterinarians such as Dr. Michael Vickers, who's a very important Texas veterinarian to speak with. He's been a veterinarian for about 50 years. He's an anthrax specialist. But Dr. Michael Vickers will tell you about the tuberculosis coming from Honduras and the Iberian Peninsula. It's a human strain that has now infected cattle in Texas beef. So they're slaughtering thousands of cattle now. Texas could lose its tuberculosis-free status, which is a big, big deal for the economy here and food supply, right? Not to mention, this will obviously spread to other cattle-producing states such as Florida, right? So this is actually quite intense. The diseases, of course, you see with whether it's malaria or dengue, these other things. Again, I've been warning about these for years. I'm a war correspondent. I study famine, pandemic, and war because they always go together. The triangle of death, right? I mean, this is it's right out of, it's biblical. I mean, it's the 4 horsemen, right? If you get a big war, you will always get famine and pandemic, period. They always go together. If you get a big pandemic, an honest pandemic, you'll always get famine and war. Or if you get a big famine, you'll get the other 2 as well. For instance, in every famine, you get typhus. That's just one example, relapsing fevers. I'm sorry, we have 1 minute? I'll go for an hour. So anyway, I should go ahead and cut it off here because I think my time is up, but thank you for having me on.
Michael, thank you for your comments. We may have questions at the end of this if you can stick with us. And what's your schedule?
That will be difficult, sir. I have an appointment that's coming up, but if I have to, I'll fly up to Idaho. This is so important to the United States.
I would take just a couple of real brief questions then. Is there any questions from the committee? Representative Monks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Michael, for being here. Appreciate your time. You'd mentioned briefly, and I know you had limited time, and so you're skipping through it pretty quick, as far as warehouses of children. Could you expand a little bit upon that and where they're being shipped to, and does that include Idaho?
Definitely. In fact, I could go on literally for hours about this. At the table I'm sitting at now, part of our team is going through some of these addresses. We have more than 8,600 addresses where some of these children are being sent to. They're put into warehouses such as a former Walmart Supercenter in Brownsville, Texas, and other places like that around Texas and other states. And from there are actually escorts. The qualifications for being an escort is you must be at least 19 years old and you have a GED. So we have escorts that literally pick up the children from these warehouses and fly them from places like McAllen and Harlingen, Texas, to places like Jacksonville, Florida, and Orlando, Florida. And oftentimes we have a couple of witnesses, actually, I could introduce you to, And these escorts actually, sometimes they have layovers and the flights are canceled or whatever, so they have to stay the night with these children in hotels. So one escort for 5 children, and if they have 10 children, they'll have 2 escorts. And when they have to stay overnight in hotels, the escort is told he has to sleep on the couch while the children take the bed. This is like a 19, 20, 21-year-old escort sometimes, right? So many of the children are picked up at baggage claim at Orlando or Jacksonville and other airports. Others are with the escorts who are old enough to rent cars. They actually rent cars and they drop them off at addresses, right? At homes. I've asked, we've interviewed these witnesses at great detail, many hours at a time on different days. And I've asked, for instance, are they dropped off at RV parks and boat ramps or what? Trailer parks, I don't know. Hotels, some actually are dropped off at hotels. We've actually had somebody in the last week watching one of the addresses, which is another story. Many of the children are actually dropped off at affluent homes, interestingly, and they'll be of mixed race. All of the children between, it depends on which camp they're coming from. But at the age of 18, they're removed from these facilities, such as in Brownsville, Texas. That one is run by the way, a company called Southwest. I'll send you some photos and video of this. Actually, yesterday, Ann Vandersteel and I, Alex Jones asked us to come on his show last week, and we did. And so he offered us the entire show yesterday. So we did 4 hours on this yesterday, just Ann Vandersteel and I hosting that show. So we talked. We had one of the eyewitnesses on yesterday who worked in one of the camps. She gave us great detail yesterday. We had Mike Flynn on yesterday, and others talking about these sorts of things. I mean, General Mike Flynn and some of the others. So it was a very interesting 4 hours yesterday where we laid this out in great detail.
Follow up? Yeah. I see no further questions. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your time and with our meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we'll hear from Chris Russo, Texans for Strong Borders. You have 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to testify. My name is Chris Russo. I'm the president of Texans for Strong Borders. We are a nonprofit organization that seeks to educate the public and policyholders about solutions to border security and immigration policy that are in the best interest of citizens. And although my work specifically is focused on the state of Texas, I think that the nature of this crisis creates a situation where every state is now a border state, because we've had, since January 2021, about 7 million nationwide encounters, and then about 1.7 million, and actually probably more than that, known gotaways. That doesn't include the number of unknown gotaways that were never detected crossing the border. And these people are not staying in the border region. They're going from the border region and being transported all over the country, whether by NGOs that contract with the Department of Homeland Security or through criminal organizations that participate in things like forced labor agreements, human trafficking, and those sorts of things. And so what my focus is for this committee is basically what can the state of Idaho do to help solve this crisis in a way that involves its involvement with the state of Texas specifically. So right now, the Biden administration has shown that they basically have no intention of fully enforcing federal immigration law. And that's why you've seen so many people coming as a response to this policy. Of course, there's been various moratoriums on deportation that have been struck down by the courts, and there have been a series of humanitarian parole schemes that have no basis in statute, and you've had about 500,000 people come into the country under those auspices. And so in light of that, our contention and the state of Texas's contention in their lawsuit with the Biden administration that's ongoing over this buoy barrier in Eagle Pass is that the federal government is in violation of its commitment to the states under Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. And that is what guarantees state security against invasion. And because of the nature of this crisis, I think it's fair to call it an invasion. Every single person who's coming across the southern border is in some way paying off these narco-terrorist cartels that control every single mile of border. And these payments are not what they used to be. They're not the $200 payment to a coyote to be led across the border and then dropped off somewhere in the border region. These are payments in the thousands of dollars, and they're according to country of origin, typically. And so in light of that, and in light of the fact that they control large swaths of territory in northern Mexico, I think it's fair to say that this really is an invasion. This is not a small-time criminal syndicate. This is a $20 billion economy based on human smuggling. And they are making more money now off of human smuggling than off of drug smuggling, which is something that's really unique to this crisis that we find ourselves in. So what is the response of the states in light of this failure to uphold its duty, or the federal government to uphold its duty to the states to protect the borders? There is a solution that we've pursued and the state of Texas has pursued under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. And that states that no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty on tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. And I will argue that both of those criteria have been met. There is an actual invasion of the southern border that's coordinated by these narco-terrorist cartels, and it's creating a situation for the state of Texas that puts us in imminent danger that will not admit of delay. The impacts have been extreme, and it's not just to the residents who, you have many ranchers in the border region who have their fences cut, who feel unsafe in their own homes, people who have their windows knocked on at night with guns, and things like that. It's also a very, very bad situation for the migrants and eventual illegal aliens themselves. Earlier this year, I talked to a pecan farmer in Eagle Pass, and they own property that goes right up to the border. And they found 44 dead bodies on their small property in just the first, I think, 14 months of the Biden administration. And obviously, since then, there have probably been more found. And so, in light of this situation, what the states could do if they declared an invasion pursuant to Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, which Governor Abbott of Texas has said he's done, is actually begin a posture of enforcement that is not just the support and observe posture that was previously the mission of the state of Texas. So starting with the night of Title 42 expiring back in May, you had an operation just outside of Brownsville, Texas, where for the first time, personnel from the state of Texas were laying concertina wire across the riverbank, and they stood in a line along the riverbank across the river from a very, very large group of migrants who were going to cross, and then once they cross into the United States, we classify them as illegal aliens. Well, all they really did is they said, we're going to stand in a line, and they had megaphones, and they were saying, you're not going to cross here. And that was actually fairly effective. They weren't laying hands on anyone, they weren't arresting anyone, because with that response of just having personnel there and a physical barrier to repel, they rerouted around, and now you see the hotspot that a lot of those people came to, which is in Eagle Pass. And in Maverick County, Texas, which is where Eagle Pass is, you've had this limited operation where now you have sort of the state of Texas in conflict from a policy standpoint with Border Patrol, where Border Patrol, their standard operating procedure is to basically let the people come across, and then they will bus them off to a processing facility where, they will make an asylum claim, or they will, get a notice to appear for illegal entry. And often those first court proceedings are far, far into the future, in the late 2020s or even into the 2030s in some cases, especially because of the overloading of the system with asylum claims. And so what the state of Texas has said is this is not acceptable. We can't have all of these people, these millions of people that are coming across, be left to their own recognizance in the United States, because it's an open question, and I think it's a very good question, whether or not these people will even show up to their court dates, 5 years down the road. And so what the state of Texas has done in Maverick County is a similar thing where they've started erecting barriers, including that buoy barrier we talked about, and putting personnel to actually, when they observe an illegal crossing, send personnel up to the point of the crossing and say, you're not crossing here. You're not going to cross that concertina wire. You need to self-deport and come in through a proper pathway. I actually don't think that that is enough. The fact is that those operations are very limited in scale, somewhat due to personnel issues. And, you know, in the state of Texas, we have a 1,250-mile border with Mexico. And so that's just a tremendous amount of territory to be able to stage an operation where you need personnel observing every mile of border. And so that has come into conflict in the form of a court case with the Biden administration on whether states have the power under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 to defend their own borders. And the way that that affects the state of Idaho is that Idaho has sent state troopers down to the border to be part of Operation Lone Star as part of brush teams. Now, this part of Operation Lone Star is more of it's not actually preventing illegal crossings. What it does is they will take the gotaways, the people who were not apprehended by Border Patrol, and they have brush teams that go through and search for people. Operation Lone Star has people that patrol the highways and look for very obvious signs of human smuggling. And so the state of Idaho has assisted in that capacity. But what I think could be done is under that framework of Article 1, Section 10, you could have an interstate compact with the state of Texas where the state of Idaho could send personnel on a mission that would put them in a situation where they would actually start repelling illegal crossings. And even where that's being done in a limited way, I think you could have a deterrent factor get built up where you could affect the ultimate outcome, which is you want to lower those record numbers of people who are coming across our southern border illegally. You know, Idaho is not on the southern border, obviously, but it still has impacts from illegal immigration. There was a 2023 study by the Federation on American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, that estimated that Idaho has a population of approximately 62,000 illegal aliens. And between the illegal aliens and their children, between the federal tax outlays of Idaho citizens and then the state budget in terms of health care and education, that the state of Idaho's fiscal impact is approximately $400 million annually from illegal immigration. That is not a small number whatsoever. And so what I would say is that what the state of Idaho can do to help combat this crisis is not only, like I said, assist with Texas's mission, which is actually going to go to repelling crossings, as opposed to the federal mission, which, as I stated earlier, is more of observe and report. But they could also take some policy, they could enact some policies to reduce illegal presence in the state. One of the most effective tools that they can use to do that is what's called the E-Verify system. Now, the E-Verify system is for employers. It's an opt-in system. And what it does is when a new employee fills out their I-9 form upon hiring, that I-9 form is uploaded by the employer to the E-Verify portal system, which cross-checks the information on that I-9 versus the Social Security Administration database to make sure that the person isn't using a fake Social Security number or something like that. In states that have implemented mandatory E-Verify, like Mississippi and Alabama, they've seen up to a 50% reduction in their projected illegal labor in the state, and that could have a massive impact. There are obviously a lot of concerns about people that utilize illegal labor and the impacts to their businesses, but I would argue that in light of the fiscal impact of illegal immigration, that there is a real policy discussion to be had, whether or not you guys think that that's the right policy solution to your state. The other thing is addressing taxpayer subsidies to illegal aliens, which is something that I think every state needs to take a look at, especially in light of the magnitude of the crisis that's unfolding and the millions of people that are coming across our border. So thank you for the time, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Chris. We are going to have the next speaker, and then we're going to have questions at the end of that for both of you. Will that work? Thank you. Okay, Chris Russo, or no, that's just who we did. Joe Edlow.
Thank you,
From
Senator.
the Heritage Foundation.
Well, I'm going to correct that record. I'm not here on behalf of Heritage today. I'm here for my own group, the Edlow Group, which is a consulting agency. So I'm not testifying on behalf of Heritage. I'm a visiting fellow there, but not today. Senator Burtonshaw, Representative Boyle, and esteemed members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to present testimony today on the issue of federalism as it relates to national immigration and border security policy. Before I start, I wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm Joseph Edlow. I have been in the immigration space since 2008 when I joined U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement as a prosecutor or trial attorney in the Baltimore field office, handling cases for 6.5 years, deportation cases in the Baltimore Immigration Court. I then joined the staff of then Congressman Raul Labrador, where I served as his counsel for a number of years before joining the House Judiciary Committee's Immigration and Border Security Subcommittee as counsel, focusing on enforcement matters largely. I joined the Trump administration in 2018, first in the Department of Justice as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General with the Office of Legal Policy, where I focused on immigration regulations and immigration matters with the department. I then left. I spent some time while I was there working in the White House with your now Solicitor General, Theo Wald. I then left the Department of Justice and joined U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, first as their chief counsel, overseeing 325 attorneys, and then was elevated for the last 11 months of the Trump administration. I served as the acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I'm encouraged today that this committee has taken the initiative to explore immigration policy and that the Idaho legislature is interested in taking more aggressive action within its authority to tamp down on the sharp increase in illegality within our immigration system. It is no secret that border encounters have exploded since January of 2021. On day one of the Biden administration, the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security halted all deportations for 100 days in order for the president to then issue an executive order aimed at removing so-called impediments or barriers to immigration. As the administration introduced new policies via federal rulemaking and memoranda, it became abundantly clear that the barriers referred to were simply immigration law. Most egregious among these policies were enforcement priorities aimed at limiting enforcement actions, dismissing cases from immigration court in the interest of prosecutorial discretion, and opening up the border for mass parole programs and fraudulent protection claims. The results have spoken for themselves. In fiscal year 2022, ICE recorded a little more than 72,000 removals from the United States. During the same period, U.S. Customs and Border Protection recorded a staggering and unprecedented 2.7 million encounters. In fiscal year 2023, thus far, we are above 2.5 million additional encounters at the southwest border. These numbers do not even account for the over 1.6 million gotaways who have eluded inspection and the Border Patrol during the Biden administration. As this committee is focused on the principles of federalism, it may seem initially disheartening that the framers, through the U.S. Constitution, have vested plenary authority for immigration and naturalization in Congress, and by extension the federal government. However, I do not need to remind this committee of the 10th Amendment that the powers not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states are reserved for the states. I would urge this committee and the legislature more generally to consider immigration and border security as you legislate on matters critical to all Idahoans in the areas of public safety, public health, education, and employment and labor laws. The health and well-being of the citizens of this state are of the utmost importance to this legislature, and the effects of illegal immigration, of a weak border, and complete lack of integrity in immigration enforcement are felt in every state, no matter how geographically it may be located from the southwest border. As I've told Congress many times, there is no longer such a thing as a border state or a border district. Each state and each district are directly reeling with these policies, and it's incumbent upon states to take more control. There are many areas where the state may act and make it clear to everyone that illegality in Idaho will not be tolerated, let alone rewarded. In the labor and employment arena, I cannot stress enough the importance of E-Verify and similar programs aimed at addressing the illegal workforce. Economic opportunity has always been a driving force for illegal immigration, and tools such as E-Verify quickly determine whether an individual is legally authorized to work in the United States. While Idaho already mandates this for state agencies and contractors, it should be expanded into private industry, or at least some private sectors. I am well aware of the potential pushback, and it is incumbent upon the state to make tough decisions and decide how to utilize this powerful tool. Turning to public safety, Idaho should take affirmative steps to prohibit sanctuary jurisdictional policies or any policies that would allow even tacit authorization for a local law enforcement agency to refuse to share information or cooperate with ICE and other federal partners. To be clear, ICE is a resource and can be a force multiplier as your local law enforcement continues the fight against trafficking and against the drug trade, including the explosion of fentanyl. Additionally, the legislature could provide a cause of action allowing any citizen to sue a jurisdiction that has a policy that prevents cooperation or communication with immigration authorities. I would urge the state to update its criminal code to include penalties for those that induce, harbor, conceal illegal aliens. When I was a trial attorney at ICE in Baltimore, I was horrified to learn of the ways in which some employers abuse employees not here legally. The worst examples include enticing aliens to enter the United States with the promise of good employment and good wages, only to place them in positions of servitude, always threatening them with deportation should they fail to perform up to the standards of these employers. Adding such penalties to state law to mirror federal law provides local prosecutors with tools that are usually reserved for federal cases only, and make it far riskier to engage in this abhorrent behavior. Likewise, any business or non-governmental organization that operates in Idaho and induces, harbors, transports, and or conceals illegal aliens should lose their business license to operate in Idaho. In the fight against trafficking, these would prove invaluable tools. Finally, I must mention the opportunities to halt the Biden policies through legal action. While states such as Texas and Florida have done yeoman's work to push back on these disastrous policies, the strength in numbers from other states joining and filing lawsuits cannot be emphasized enough. Idaho has already joined in several lawsuits, and I am so proud each and every time I see my friend and former boss, Mr. Labrador, signed on to a lawsuit. I thank you for your time and look forward to any questions that this committee might have.
Committee, we have time for questions for either Mr. Edlow or Russo. Do you have any questions? Representative Horman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Edlow. Are there other states that have pursued some of these remedies to help resolve their problem?
Absolutely.
Mr. Edlow.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative, for the question. Absolutely. There is a laundry list of actions that can be taken, and we can talk about this more later on, but several states have utilized this in various forms. One state that I think has done a fantastic job is South Carolina, which has implemented many of these policies statewide, including, I don't know if they've done the E-Verify, but they've done a lot in terms of business licenses and also including a cause of action against sanctuary policies and the business licenses, taking away from those that are harboring illegal aliens.
Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, for Mr. Edlow, appreciate your background. A lot of experience as a prosecutor and with the administration. And I know former Congressman Labrador used to practice immigration.
You did.
Your colleagues, as far as the legal profession goes in the Treasure Valley. Federal immigration used to work, but the Biden administration is certainly kind of a unmitigated disaster, for lack of a better term. Is the system fixable at the federal level, and how do you do it?
Mr. Edlow.
Senator, I believe it is. I have always said that the first step to fixing the system is to simply enforce the laws that are on the books. We need to start with that. Are there changes that need to be made? Are there reforms that need to be made? Absolutely. But we can't even look at that until Congress starts to take its oversight authority seriously to clamp down on some of the abuses that we're seeing. I testified in June twice, first before the House Judiciary Committee and then the House Homeland Security Committee, on the shameful work and inaction of the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Mayorkas. We need to get rid of people like Secretary Mayorkas who are effectively stopping all immigration enforcement. All we need to do is enforce the laws. We need to remove people with final orders. We need to stop the bleeding at the border. And we need to make people realize that if they cross into this country, either from a federal standpoint or what you all can do from a state standpoint, there are consequences. And once we do that, we can get this in order and then make some needed changes.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Edlow, I'd love to visit offline. I certainly realize enforcing what we've got is great. Maybe interested in some more detail on, even with President Trump in place, still didn't seem to be able to get fixes to the system to make it appropriate for appropriate people, or easier for appropriate people to come into the United States via immigration.
Well, if I may respond to that, Senator, when I was the head of USCIS, which is the legal immigration system, we took that mission very seriously to make sure that those who were legally here, who were trying to get legal benefits, could get through the system properly. I can tell you, and I do practice immigration law privately now too, in some business matters. Some of my colleagues who are not aligned with me politically have said that objectively, not subjectively, objectively, it is worse right now, and the lines are longer right now for people to get through the legal immigration system. But, you know, the Trump administration, in terms of what we were able to accomplish just for border security by adding additional pathways, whether it be the Remain in Mexico program, whether it be several expedited processing places that we set up for certain migrants from certain places, whether it be the asylum cooperative agreements that allowed us to return people to have their cases heard in other countries. We had pathways, and people knew that coming to the border and saying, hey, I'm here, is not a guarantee that you're going to get to stay here. Now, you walk in, the Biden administration has made it abundantly clear that everyone who comes across that border is in fear for their lives, regardless of the fact that the economy and economics is not a basis for protection in this country. The Biden administration feels that everyone there is a legitimate legitimate asylum seeker, legitimate protection seeker, and accordingly, they're just flowing it in. Everyone's getting work authorization, and people know this. The perception of an open border matters, and that is what we are seeing. We had the perception of a closed border. I'm not saying we had perfect numbers, but our numbers were significantly lower, and no administration, Republican or Democrat, has ever seen sustained numbers like we have seen since 2021.
Thank you. Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I don't know who to address this question to, I guess, but Mr. Russo, I think you referenced narco-terrorists. To me, it seems like they're encouraging this big influx of illegal immigration. Is there anything that can be done to combat that at that level?
Well, what I would say is that I think that border security and obtaining operational control of the border is the first step into rooting out the cartels from their operations in this country. What's needed is basically a full-scale counterinsurgency operation, because you're going to have to first create a controlled perimeter and then start rooting out the cartel influences within the system. They have a lot of influence in local and county level government in the state of Texas and all along the border region. They have a lot of front businesses that operate and that are participating in these sort of forced labor agreements and are part of the drug smuggling. And really, I think no one or a lot of people don't realize the effort that it's going to take to really solve that problem. But I think the first thing that you can do is you can communicate, as Mr. Edlow said, that there is no guarantee of coming into the country and remaining here if you show up at the southern border. If you take away that effective invitation to come here, then you will see numbers quickly go back to normal historical levels, which are still too high for my comfort, but at least that gets you out of a crisis situation, and now you can start to pursue long-term border security measures and start to try and enforce the laws on the books and then reform those laws on the books where they have problems. I mean, immigration law has a whole edifice of settlements and things like that that need to be addressed, and I think that the U.S. House sought and was pretty successful at addressing them in H.R. 2 earlier this year. Of course, it went nowhere in the United States Senate. But I think that all of those steps are necessary, and it's going to be a huge lift even after you achieve some sort of operational control of the border to root out cartels in our communities.
We have a follow-up by Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Russo, so you talked about interstate compacts with the state of Texas. Our governor and other members of our law enforcement community leaders have been down to Texas and I think have kind of laid foundations for cooperative relationships. But does Texas have any of those, and what do they look like? And is the state inviting them?
Mr. Russo.
As far as Operation Lone Star goes, they are inviting members from other states. To my knowledge, there have not been members of other state law enforcement participating in these sort of extraordinary operations where they're actually repelling illegal crossings in Maverick County and elsewhere. I would say that I really, really encourage Governor Abbott to pursue that and to encourage that, because we just don't have the personnel, to be frank, to enforce all 1,250 miles of border. The state legislature attempted to address that by creating a state-level border protection unit under those powers of Article 1, Section 10, and to have a dedicated force to do what Operation Lone Star and DPS have been doing in Texas. But those efforts failed, and so right now we don't have the personnel. And other states like Idaho and Florida and Kentucky have sent state troopers towards those sort of away from the line operations to address the gotaways in Operation Lone Star. But I think that the state of Texas can still do more to invite those sorts of cooperations. And my argument is that with a Article 1, Section 10 invasion declaration, that those interstate compacts do not need the approval of Congress, as it says in that part of the U.S. Constitution. So I think that Governor Abbott needs to do more to invite that sort of cooperation, but I think it would help if other states approached him and said, we see these operations where you're actually repelling illegal crossings. We agree with the legal framework by which you can do that. How can we help?
Thank you. I see no further questions. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you.
We'll now move into our next section, Idaho Law Enforcement panel. We'll hear from is Lieutenant Colonel Kelly here? Sheldon, is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that is correct.
You have 10 minutes to address us, and then when we finish everybody's testimony, we'll ask questions.
All right, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Good morning, Senators, representatives, members of the committee. I don't know that I need all 10 minutes. Mainly here, I'll give a brief overview of our visit to the border, and then certainly be available for any questions that anybody has for me. Earlier this year in Texas, we were requested from Texas to assist on their border operations, Operation Lone Star. We sent a team of domestic highway enforcement troops that work on criminal interdiction, and we also sent some of our members of our SWAT team to assist the brush teams in Texas chasing those folks that get across and then get into the brush and try to infiltrate further into the country. I also traveled down there while our folks were down there looking at it. The colonel and I went down there with the governor, check in on our folks and see what actually is happening. It was incredible, and you can see the pictures on the news. You can read the articles of it. So you actually physically see what is going on down there. It's hard to describe or hard to comprehend what all is going on. The encampments across the border of all the folks just waiting to cross. While we were there, and some of the other folks have mentioned it already, they were Texas was installing physical barriers to crossing to keep them from actually putting a foot on American soil and forcing them into the actual crossing areas where they could be processed. Concertina wire, the National Guard folks were putting up concertina wire. While we were there, Florida was sending an incredible amount of folks. Their state level law enforcement were coming. Their state troopers were coming to assist. Nebraska had just left and was also, they were going to follow us and come back after we left. Our criminal interdiction folks spent a lot of time working with the Texas DPS folks that are patrolling the border area. And as you understand and realize, with the influx of personnel coming across, the cartels are using this to also, that's where they're sending the drugs and the contraband across in these groups, because the law enforcement forces are tied up with all the folks coming across, and that's a good opportunity for them to ship the contraband and illegal substances across as well. At the border where it is so concentrated, and of course Texas has a lot of folks there looking for it, so the concealment methods are incredible. The tactics they use for getting that contraband in, which ultimately some of that ends up here in Idaho, is just incredible. So the opportunity for our folks to go down there and get that experience of actually working and finding those loads, finding the loads of human trafficking victims, that experience was just immeasurable, and they bring that experience back here and can spread it throughout the folks here and help teach them here. A little earlier, a couple years before that, we also sent a team of our criminal interdiction folks down to Arizona, and this was in the heyday when the numbers coming across all the borders were just incredible. And our folks would talk about, on any given shift, they're finding numerous loads of contraband, numerous loads of human trafficking victims. There's pursuits, and just the amount of lawlessness along the border was just incredible. We, like I mentioned, the director and I and the governor actually flew along the border. Texas DPS took us, and it is incredible what's going on. I know they could use all the help they can get down there, and we were certainly happy to send what we could. Obviously, we have limited resources here in Idaho to assist with the border, but we did what we could. And I think that will wrap up my remarks, and I will stand for questions at the end of all the presentations.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Kelly. We now have Kieran Donahue from Canyon County Sheriff. Did I say that first name right?
No, but that's all right.
What is it?
Kieran.
Kieran?
Kieran Donahue, Canyon County Sheriff.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The speakers before me have done an excellent job of giving an overview of what we're facing. And one thing that this committee and we in Idaho have to very much focus on is the damage it does to Idaho and what we're facing on a daily basis. The cartels are literally infiltrated every community, every town, every city, every county in the United States. Make no mistake about it. This is an absolute war, and they are winning and we are losing this war. The amount of money that the gentleman have spoke to is just a drop if you look at it annually. We're in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and these people will not and cannot give that up. The two main cartels that we deal with here in Idaho is the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel. Sinaloa Cartel has been around for many, many years. The Jalisco is just that, a new cartel that's come onto the scene, and they're pushing what you see primarily here in Idaho in the fentanyl business. And that is really what's driving the money, in addition to the human trafficking that you've heard of. They're hand in hand, and the gentleman is right. Human trafficking is more advantageous monetarily than even the drugs today, but they're still both very prevalent. You have to understand what we in Idaho face. We do have the northern border, and our northern border has become extremely porous, with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, moving through the porous northern border, which Idaho has. You have to understand the cartel makeup. If you look at what the DEA administrator has to say about fentanyl, their complex economic engine and model, they don't care if they lose 20 to 30, 40% even of their consumer base, as long as they secure 60% of their consumer base for long-time addiction through fentanyl, methamphetamine. That's a pretty stark statement to make by DEA. And when you look at the amount of drugs that they're pushing and the intensity of fentanyl, it's literally 2 milligrams that would fit on the end of your pencil or your pen today. 2 grains of, let's say, salt is a deadly dose. A deadly dose, 2 milligrams. So when they're pushing this, and Idaho State Police and local law enforcement, we're seizing tens of thousands of pills, tens of thousands, and every 6 out of every 10 pill is known to be a lethal dose by DEA analysis. But we're also intercepting hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds of powder mixed in with fentanyl, or mixed in with marijuana, mixed in with heroin, mixed in with methamphetamine. That's why you see the death rates and the overdose rates so high here in Idaho. I'm going to back up just so you have a full understanding of the cartel makeup. The precursors for methamphetamine, the fentanyl, comes from China primarily, Southeast Asia primarily, and now India. This is tracked by our partners, our colleagues throughout the United States, through our government. Those precursors come into South America, Central America, and of course Mexico. A lot of it's through maritime because it's easier to get through. The smuggling routes are then out of inland out of Mexico because they control, as has been stated here today, they control the border. They control the 2,000 miles. They control every inch of it. No one comes across that border without paying the fee, whether it's human trafficking or smuggling. No one comes across. And the gentleman said thousands of dollars. The average price right now that we're seeing is $15,000 per individual, anywhere from $6,000 to $15,000 per individual. Known terrorist suspects that we have identified at the border through Customs and Border Protection, they pay upwards of $25,000 per individual. And I'll speak about that in just a moment. So the control of that border is paramount. The cartels are extremely ruthless. I travel to the border, as you may know, many, many times, and I'll be there at least twice next month, if not 3 times, looking at this situation. The aggressiveness, the decapitations, the tortures, the victimization is literally unprecedented throughout our world today as to what the cartels do. This is how serious they are about it. They have to control those entry points. They have to control the open areas between our entry points because that's how they get their people through. Once they get into America, I-10, we spoke that the Colonel just, or Lieutenant Colonel just spoke about, going to Florida, Texas, out of Arizona, north to Idaho, the North Pacific highways, and then of course the northern border coming across through Vancouver and then dropping down all the way across into Maine. This is how the stuff gets to us. And it's there are people that are working for the cartels under duress, and as was also mentioned, under servitude, right? Slavery today is widespread by the cartels. Because just think if you're from Guatemala, Honduras, or Venezuela, you don't have $15,000, or you wouldn't be leaving that country. So you're entered into servitude, and you owe those cartels that money. So your price may be two years in hard labor for a landscape company, a hotel. You name the company, there's bad actors in America who are bringing these people in and forcing this hard labor. That's how you pay off your debt. If you don't pay off your debt, you and or your family will be killed to make an example of the next family who doesn't want to pay their debt. This is well documented. This is real. It's not imagined. This is extreme. This is a war that we are in, and the cartels run this war. And so as we talk about what does Idaho do, Idaho first has to understand the magnitude of what we're facing, that these people are crossing the border with full automatic weapons. We have a camera system throughout the state of Arizona, into New Mexico. We are teamed up now from the National Sheriff's Association with the state of Florida, with the state of Texas, those governors, and we have what we call the American Sheriff Alliance. That's all sheriffs, the Southwest Border Sheriffs, the major county sheriffs, and the National Sheriff's Association, which I represent today as the Vice President of the NSA. We have come together to build a deeper camera system to identify these bad actors and then to share that with the interior sheriffs and law enforcement throughout all of our states. It's a very heavy lift, which was just mentioned. So these types of things that we're doing are in combat against those bad actors. The numbers are absolutely staggering. And when we talk about the apprehensions at the ports of entry, that's only half of the story, because the gotaways, that's where the real story becomes. Just think of this. There's approximately 7 million people have crossed that border in the last 2 to 3 years. 7 million. Nearly 2 million are gotaways. What's a gotaway? It's the person that we see, Customs Border Protection or law enforcement knows came across that border, but we couldn't apprehend them. We couldn't process them. We couldn't give them a date that they're allegedly going to show up in 5 years from now at their hearing. It's not going to happen. The gotaways are people who don't want to be apprehended, who don't want to claim asylum, who don't want you to know that they are here operating in your country. Nearly 2 million. Right now it's 1.6, 1.7 million that we know of. We don't know the others. Who are they? Where are they? And what are they doing? And where did they come from? We have actors from China. We literally have actors that we have identified at the southern border of over 125 countries. Countries. I can assure you they are not our friends. China is pushing this, and I speak nationally on this issue. China, in Sheriff Donahue's opinion, is in it for the 1,000-year war, generational war. And the best way to take over a country is to, without firing a shot, is to destroy the social economic fabric of the country, which is what they're doing by their collaboration with the Mexican cartels using fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, etc. It destroys the fabric of the country by the social system, the justice system, the medical system, the health and welfare system. We're pouring all these resources because of those people putting that poison into this country, let alone the sheer numbers of deaths, which my family has experienced as well by methamphetamine and fentanyl both. So I can speak true to that matter. And so I think that what we can do as Idaho, we already have a reputation to don't deal drugs in Idaho, right? We have stronger laws in the state of Idaho. We have minimum mandatory on the books for certain substances. We can do more. We have to. This is a very multiple tiered system where I agree that most likely the best thing to do is secure the border, and then it's military action to secure that border, and then military intrusion into Mexico. The Mexican president has shown he does not want to work with us. He completely whitewashes this, and the government, I feel bad for them because they're under threat of being killed by the cartels. No matter whether you're in the legislature, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a reporter, or wherever you land in Mexico, the threat of death is imminent. And so America has to take its border back. And if you were to travel with me and to meet with these people who have lost their loved ones in those border towns and on that border, and the ranchers who will give you the testimony that the cartels come to them, to their house, and they say, "We know where your wife shops. We know where your kids go to school. And if you turn us in for crossing your country, we will come back and we will kill you. Do you understand us? We will kill you." And they do, and they have. And I've interviewed those people. This is real. And it's a threat. And that threat exists right here in the United States. It exists in Idaho. And my colleague, Chief Ingram, is going to speak about that, what we face from the interdiction and stopping it from the local level as local law enforcement. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop and I will stand for questions when the time is appropriate.
Thank you. We have Rex Ingram from the Caldwell Chief Police. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tenshaw, Representative Boyle, and other members of this committee. First and foremost, I want to say thank you. I'm super honored to be here with this panel behind me of super educated, very knowledgeable experts in the field of immigration and law enforcement. Very respected panel. I bring a little bit of a different perspective. I haven't been to the border lately, but I was raised south of the border of Mexico. And I was deported at 5 years old by heavily armed men that kicked my family out of the country because of the business that my parents were making there and the success that they had. Growing up in Los Angeles, I've been a beneficiary to failed soft on crime policies. I was an LAPD officer for the first part of my career, which seeing my kids being raised in that community firsthand inspired me, like other Californians, to move to the great state of Idaho because of the tough on crime policies and the rule of law that's enforced here. And so what I bring to the table is perspective that's not from the state. What I bring to the table is what we're doing in Canyon County, what the sheriff is kind of talking to. We're part of a Treasure Valley Metro Violent Crime Task Force that's partnered up with our federal counterparts at the FBI, the Sheriff's Office, and my agency with the Caldwell Police Department. One of the big topics of discussion in this committee has been children. And what I can tell you right now in Idaho, and specifically in Canyon County, is that children are our violent offenders. They make up 80 to 90% of all of our drive-by shootings, all the trigger pullers, because the cartels and the street gangs that riddle our communities here know that our policies and our state laws and our gang laws are not as tough as they need to be. Specifically, our Fourth Amendment waivers. And so, like I tell my police officers when they come to me with suggestions and my command staff, I want to go with not problems, but solutions. So I'm coming here with hopefully some different solutions and to introduce some of my thoughts as an outsider, because zero bail doesn't work. I've been partners with people that have been murdered in the line of duty, and those suspects responsible have not faced the judicial system like they should be. In Idaho, we have a very supportive community. We have a very supportive legislative body that supports law and order, and I'm very thankful for that. So hopefully we can come to something in the next legislative session. First and foremost, our juvenile justice system is not working. If the adults that are supplying the guns and the narcotics to our juveniles understand that when they get arrested for doing a shooting, they're going to get released right away, that's a failure. Then they get out, and then they do the same thing over and over again until they get caught when they're 18 or 19 years old, and by that time it's already too late. We have people dying in the street. Turn on the news, you'll see all of our press releases that we're doing what seems like on a daily basis, and it's tragic. I'm going to talk about a case of a young man named Ethan Almaraz, who was just tried and sentenced as an adult, as a 17-year-old kid. Ethan Almaraz did several robberies. He did several aggravated assaults. He stabbed a couple different other kids, and he was let out repeatedly by the court in Canyon County, by the judge, because he was a minor. Ultimately, what led to his capture was a murder that he did, a gang murder at a party, and then he was tried as an adult finally, and only after several ankle bracelets being removed, failing to show up for his hearings, warrants out for his arrest, and then finally his shooting. That's a failure, right? And so as an outsider, what I see as a chief of police, I'm not a litigator, I'm not a legislative person, but what I am is someone that is employed by the government to keep this community safe. We're failing. We need to give our officers the ability to do our job at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, giving them the power to search someone that's on parole, because that is not a right, it's a privilege to be out of prison. It's a privilege to be out of county jail on probation. It's not a right. I'm a law and order constitutional chief of police. I moved my 4 kids here and my wife because I believe in the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States of America and the right for all of us to live happy and pursue happiness without being victimized or terrorized. What we're doing, if we had a press conference on Monday with the U.S. Attorney, and what we announced is we indicted 25 federal indictments on known cartel gang members that are operating in Eastern Oregon and Southern Idaho. People don't want to know about that stuff, but that's real. That's real life, real-time stuff that's happening here. So how do we prevent that? Well, let's talk about the addiction, right? If we have people coming here and supplying our streets with fentanyl and guns and all the other things that are killing our kids, it's because people are buying it. We got to talk about that stuff. And it's happening every day. We got to talk about the prevention. California is a lost cause. Zero bail, all the different things, AB 109, go to narcotics court, get a free pass, get a rider, and get out. We have the ability right now in Idaho to stop this before it escalates to a California, to a Washington, to a New York, a Chicago, a Baltimore. We have to take charge. Giving our officers, like I said, the tools to do their job at 2, 3 in the morning, like a Fourth Amendment waiver for someone that's on probation or parole. Making stricter laws on the books for juveniles. If you do a shooting and you're a documented gang member under 188502 of Idaho Code, then guess what? You get tried as an adult. If you pull a trigger in a drive-by shooting, we're not going to give you a pass and let you go to your mom or dad and cry about it. You want to do that? You want to act like a big boy? Then you're going to go to prison. It's that simple. We have to get tougher on that. One of the other things that I want to talk about is stronger sentencings for crime with gang members. Currently, our gang enhancement laws for the serious crimes are 5 years we add to any gang-related crime. That's too soft. It's too soft. These gang members, the way they go around that is they give the gun to the kid to go do that drive-by. We need to hold the adults accountable. We need to hold the parents accountable, and we need to hold everyone in that side accountable. Our judges as well are letting people out. I just met with the district judge last week on a case where we had an individual who has a rap sheet that's very long with a preponderance of violence in his past. He gets released after he's convicted and sentenced, gets out on probation, kidnaps his child, and gets in a big use of force with the police over his child after he just kidnapped. Why is this happening? The system is failing. And so we are doing everything at the executive level branch of government, which is law enforcement. We need everyone to be on the same page. We have to work together, and we have to be better. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Committee, do we have questions? Senator Just.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this question is for Sheriff Donahue, or I believe the chief could probably answer this as well. But Sheriff, you said that the cartels have infiltrated, I think I'm quoting you right, every community in Idaho. I'm wondering how you identify them. How do you know that? I'm not questioning it. I just want to know how you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Sheriff Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator. We know through long years of investigation. I myself was on the same Metro Violent Crime Gang Task Force with the FBI in this valley prior to becoming sheriff. And we continue that practice. So when we are doing a case, it's an excellent question because our cases are complex. They're multi-defendant, they're highly complex cases, and they can go from 2 months to 2 years, even 3 years before we go after indictments of the bad actors, depending on the lethality of the case. That information is shared. So, for example, we took a case off here recently that involved numerous cartel members. It was local street gangs, as the chief mentioned, that are moving those products for the cartels, but the tie is directly back to the cartels. So we were able to buy our way in, if you will, through confidential informants and undercover officers into the strongholds of the cartels who identify themselves as Sinaloan or Jalisco New Generation. And we understand, and they give information periodically as to the smuggling routes, which we then share with our DEA partners, our FBI partners, and our partners on the southern border. So over a long period of time, we have established that network of information. So that's in part how we know. A second aspect, you today, Senator, we sit in what we call a high-intensity drug trafficking area. It's called a HIDA. There are 29 HIDAs designated by the Department of Justice in the continental United States, plus another 4, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, etc. That's not a great label to have, that Boise, Idaho is in a HIDA, because there are only 29. But what that means is all the information we, through our unified citation reports, where it goes to the FBI, that's looked at the United States Attorney's Office, Department of Justice, and about 8 years ago, we petitioned the DOJ to allow us in to the Oregon HIDA, Portland, Oregon HIDA, because of the sheer amount of drug trafficking and distribution and use here in Idaho. The United States Attorney Wendy Olson was in office at that time. We were granted into that. So now you have a HIDA that runs from Portland, Oregon, all the way to Malheur County, Ontario, Vail to Boise, and on to Pocatello, Idaho. That is one HIDA, which I sit on the executive board for that, for our state. That is a wealth of information, and the beauty of the HIDA is that it's federal dollars through DOJ, the Office on National Drug Control Policy, fund that and fund our task forces and our intel centers so that we can share that information. So we have information coming from all kinds of sources throughout the United States that helps us identify the information that your question pertained to, if that helps you, sir.
Mm-hmm. Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, always great to see you. Appreciate all the members of the panel. You guys are leaders in this fight, and very grateful for your service and your efforts. Sheriff, and then maybe Chief as well, you commented about Idaho being different. And, in this fight, we have to attack both the supply and the demand. The demand, hold the users accountable, but also get them treatment. But the supply comes from the cartels. Talk to us about the effectiveness of mandatory minimums in Idaho. And, we've had efforts to insert discretion into that. The judges need a safety valve. The judges need to have more discretion in that process. Share your thoughts with us on that, if you would.
So, Sheriff Donahue or Chief Ingram, you could take turns on this, or one of you can make that comment. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Lakey. Thank you for the compliments, and it's always a pleasure to see you too as well, sir. We are known in Idaho. We have a reputation. I'm going to point right to our neighbors to the west in Ontario, Vail, parts of Bend, Oregon. That same information network through our investigations, when we do deals, quote deals, when we go out and do a buy operation that I explained to the senator, we have to make contact with the individual and purchase the drugs or purchase the guns or whatever from these felonious actors. Time and time again over the last several years, they say, we'll meet you across the river in Ontario, where we're not coming to Idaho because you have mandatory minimums. This is a real statement made by drug traffickers and transcontinental drug trafficking organizations. So we know that's working. It's not enough, obviously, but it does help us. And now with our Violent Crime and Gang Task Force, we're also obviously deputized by the U.S. Marshal and by the FBI. So the river doesn't stop us. We don't have jurisdictional boundaries under that. So that's a help to our communities. And so that mandatory minimum, that reputation alone, Idaho is tough on drug dealers, tough on drug traffickers. And I think that is a real building block to build on. I know that we talked about mandatory minimums. I think some people have a misunderstanding of what that does or what that looks like, but there are prosecutors and judges do want some safety valve possibly in that. We're willing to look at that, and I think that's a conversation going into this next legislative session. And before I turn it over to the Chief, you're absolutely right, Senator. The over amount of supply, and we often talk about this, and that's about securing that border. There is no hope for your children, these kids, these teenagers who are picking up these oxys, thinking they're oxys and it's fentanyl, and dying because the sheer oversupply of drugs into this state, into this country, is unprecedented, and we can't sustain it. If we can just hold that border, if we can just hold that line, northern and south, and give a pause for our community, our citizens, to say, give us a breather, then we can control more of that drug distribution and stop it through the interdiction methods that the Lieutenant Colonel spoke of, and those of us that are on doing interdiction. We have to stop the oversupply so we can give a breathing spot to our people. Then we can maybe start addressing the addiction problem in this state. But the system's overwhelmed.
Chief Ingram.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Senator Lakey. Very valid question, obviously. We're dealing with a drug, a narcotic, that we've never dealt with before in this country. We have to change. We have to change our tactics. The cartels are extremely sophisticated. They're extremely organized. and they know our laws better than we do. And that's a reality. The way we combat it on the street level is obviously like what the sheriff is talking about, the lieutenant colonel is talking about, but really is targeting our kids before the gangs target them. The lethal dose, 6 out of every 10 pills, is going to kill someone. We have to also work with the media. I'm very passionate about this. One of my officers almost died from being exposed to fentanyl. And then we have the media that comes out that day and says that physically cannot happen. You can stand in a wind tunnel and ingest it for hours before you pass out or die. That is not right. What message does that send to our communities, to our schools, to our children, my children, your children, when they watch it at 10 o'clock on the news that some doctor says, no, this isn't a problem. You touch it, everything's fine. It's not fine. We have to change the culture. We have to change the mindset. I'm proud that we just started partnering up with Trivium Life Services out of Boise. They have a Caldwell office. So we see someone that's a user that truly wants to get help, well, we'll get them the help. But they have to want to help themselves as well. I can't keep filling the sheriff's jail with people that are simply users, okay? We need to get people the help they need. However, if they're going to distribute fentanyl or other dangerous drugs, they need to be held accountable. And the judicial discretion is not working, as I just testified with trigger pullers. People who we know are pulling the trigger and killing people or driving by and shooting at innocent people are not being held accountable because of judicial discretion. You have the power to give us the tools to enforce that law. And that's where I stand on that.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chief and Sheriff. Appreciate those comments. One of the other comments that was made earlier was about interstate compacts and cooperating, for example, with Texas. And I know you both. You have to go to your county commissioners, you have to go to your city council and talk about staffing and funding. Talk about how we might be able to cooperate. Is there an opportunity for that? Does that mean additional officers? How would that practically work on the ground? And is there ability to do that?
Sheriff, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Lakey, yes, there is the ability to do that. And yes, it does cost money. That we're all under budgetary constraints. All of you, all of us. But that's where we have to find that avenue, that path forward. So from the county perspective, and similar to the chief's perspective, and of course the lieutenant colonel, we do need to assist states like Texas, states like Arizona, states like New Mexico, who doesn't want any help by their own states, so not the law enforcement, those that are in power. We can and should send troops down, whether that's National Guard troops, whether it's state troopers like the colonel and lieutenant colonel accompanied down there, because it augments as a force multiplier holding the line. And we need to hold that line because literally whatever gets through them comes to us. Literally, no matter what. You talk to these border sheriffs, you talk to these governors, it's not staying in Arizona, it's not staying in Texas, it's not staying in New Mexico or Florida. It's coming your way. That's where the money is. And so every state is a border state. And the chief just said that the potency of this drug, fentanyl, and I'm going to take just a personal approach to this, Senator. This is not FDA approved fentanyl patches medically administered in a hospital. And that's what the chief is talking about when we get this rebuttal from the media and others. From a doctor sitting in Ohio inside of a dark basement office. Sorry, that's where he was. This is street fentanyl. This is made in clandestine laboratories in the jungle, in the suburbs of Mexico, in Colombia, mixed by people who are not even educated, with a person with a gun standing over them saying you're going to mix it. No one's seen how much fentanyl goes into that pill, these clandestine stamped pills. That's what we're facing out there. And so whatever's coming through Texas and Arizona is coming to us, and that's what we're seeing on the streets. So the interstate compacts, the money, we as government officials as government, I would say, we have to find a way to find the money to address the threat. Secondarily, we have to push our Congress and our administration to address the same threat through whatever means they can. We all know how difficult that is right now. No one's blind to that. But we can't give up the fight because we are woefully behind. So we must take it upon ourselves to find that money, to find those resources. If it's taken to hire more law enforcement, then do so. But I can tell you that law enforcement pool of applicants is that big because of the rhetoric over the years of law enforcement. So we are scrambling to fill the open seats we have, let alone bring new ones on. But you got to pay them a livable wage. You can't pay them pennies. You got to pay them in rural communities like the good representative has. You got to pay them a livable wage so they can fight this fight. So yes, sir, I strongly agree that we need to join forces, and we're seeing that in patchwork. We need to see more of it.
Chief Ingram, do you have some comments?
The only thing I'll add in the interest of time is just it starts with communication, and this is a great step. It shouldn't start in January. It should start now, and we should all be on a unified front. Thank you.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for what you do and appreciate your presentation. Chief, you mentioned something that I want to push on a bruise a little bit here, and I wouldn't have maybe normally brought it up, but since you mentioned it, it had to do with your frustration with judicial leniency.
Yes.
So we as a legislature provide you with the laws, you're out there enforcing them, but you mentioned sometimes judicial leniency imbalances that equation. Can you elucidate that a little bit? I know it's a touchy subject with your work relationship, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about that if you're comfortable doing that, either one of you or all three of you, however that may go.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Chief Ingram, go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the question, and it's a very valid question. So unlike my former career in Los Angeles, where the officers can do their job with the tools and then zero bail policies that are imposed by the judges here, it's hard to actually get someone in a courtroom. And once they're in the courtroom, not all the judges, but some of them, and it's the same players that we're seeing, the same judges, are letting folks go because they don't believe that this person or this defendant did what they did, even though they're convicted by a jury of their peers, or that they think that it was not as egregious as it was, because the law allows them to do that. And I get it. You know, I have family members in my family that didn't do good things and that went to prison and jail, and, you know, I'm not proud of them. And so I understand the empathy side of it, and that's why I made it a point of myself to actually have a dialogue with the judges and actually go in there, speak to them, get their perspective, let them hear my perspective. All I want is to have a safe community. And it undermines the entire system when our officers, like the sheriff said, have to have a livable wage, that are working for less than Target or Costco are paying their employees to check receipts, going out there, risking their life on every holiday and weekend, making a valid arrest under the Fourth Amendment and all the state laws and the Constitution. They give up their day off, they go to court, they testify, they prepare this whole case, they forfeit their vacation sometimes, their ski trips, their outdoor stuff, all to be told by a judge this person is going to be released. And then, like Ethan Almaraz, who has been sentenced to prison as a minor, gets right out, cuts his ankle bracelet off, and now the cycle continues, and the cycle continues. Enough is enough. And that's just in the year that I've been the chief here. We have to give the officers the power to do our job, but the judges and the system have to continue through and do their job. I haven't done any press releases on any of our judges because I'm trying to do what I think is the right thing first and communicate with them, understand their perspective, and understand why the decisions are being made at their level. With fentanyl, that's the violent crime. With fentanyl, we have to do something because we're losing people every single day, and they're not bad people. Some of them are very good people in our community.
Thank you, Chief. We have time for one more question. Representative Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add one thing and then ask a question. Besides the judges, it can be the prosecutors. A lot of our rural counties, the prosecutors are only part-time and they don't want to deal with any of it. So law enforcement will work themselves to the bone, and the prosecutor will say, no, I'm not going to do anything. So I think we need to do something with that. But could you, Chief, explain that Fourth Amendment waiver? Because some of us are not on Juden rules and have no idea what you're talking about.
Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, ma'am. Back to your first point about the prosecutors. Obviously, everyone has their own opinion on things and what can be won in court, what can't be won. But what I want to say is the prosecutors and the judges are not being held to answer for the decisions that impact the system. Who's being held to answer? The most visible form of government, which is law enforcement. Out there every day of the week. You call a police officer at 2 in the morning, they're going to show up to your door. You can't get a hold of anyone else at 2 in the morning, a judge or a prosecutor, meaning the public that are angry with the system. So we get to hear from all sides of the spectrum. To your question, though, the Fourth Amendment is obviously protects the United States citizenry from unreasonable searches and seizures by law enforcement. It's what we cherish in this country, and we all defend as law enforcement. Something in Idaho that needs to be fixed is allowing police officers, not just probation and parole officers, to have a waiver, meaning that we can search someone that's on active parole or probation with search conditions. As it stands, at 3 in the morning, I'll just say 3, 4, 5 in the morning, hypothetically speaking, if I see Kieran Donahue, who I know as a gang officer is on active parole with conditions, I cannot stop him and talk to him without probable cause. That's wrong. If I know he's on parole and I want to search him because he probably has a gun on him based on his rap sheet and his agreement to be released early from prison, then he's subject to search and seizure. Being released from prison is not a right, it's a privilege. So as it stands right now, I then have to call a parole officer, have them come out to the scene and authorize and otherwise supervise a search of Kieran Donahue. In other states that are dealing with violence, everyday murders all day long, at least the officers have the ability at 3 in the morning to do their job. And if the courts let them go later, it is what it is. But we see people day in and day and night that we can't talk to unless we have someone from probation and parole, which is a state agency, to be there to help us do that. The officers need the tools to do that, and it's called a fourth waiver. And the sheriff and I and other chiefs in the Treasure Valley have had a great relationship with the director of IDOC, with the director of the parole commissioner. We have constant communications on a monthly basis. And when I brought this up at our first executive meeting back in, I think, March-ish, the finger was, well, you can go to the building in downtown Boise that's oddly shaped, and you can tell the legislator and see what they can do to help us. So that, to me, is being told it's out of our hands as well. I just want to be able to give our police officers the tools to do their job. That's really all, I'm trying to say with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Committee will move into our next section, and that's legislator order reports. They'll each have 5 minutes. We'll start with Senator Phil Hart, and then Tammy Nichols, and J.C. Gallagher, and then Ted Hill, after which we'll have questions.
Thank you, committee, for putting this on the agenda today. I want to give you my conclusion first and then get into my remarks. My conclusion is that what's happening at the southern border is not sustainable and threatens the existence of our nation. I've been to the southern border between Arizona and Mexico 4 times to the same town, Sassabee, Arizona. I was there in 2008, in 2013, and again twice this year, in April of this year, and again in June. Let me tell you what I saw back in 2008 and 2013 first. Small groups would come across the border. They would hike across the Arizona desert, 30, 40, 50 miles. They would carry clean clothes on their back, minimal supplies. Once they got well into Arizona, they would take their clothes off that they trekked across the desert in, they'd dump them somewhere, they put on their clean clothes, they'd go out into the local community and make it look like they belong there. And most of them would get picked up and taken to other parts across the country. They came across in small groups. One time when I was down there in 2013, I was with a group of about 30 people. We stayed out all night. We made a line about 2 miles long, and there were a couple of us every 100 or 200 yards, and we just waited for illegals to come to us, and we caught a group of 6 that night, and we thought that was a good catch. And they were all males. And so I didn't catch them where I was on that line, but another group of folks caught them. They called Border Patrol. Border Patrol came and picked them up. What I saw when I was down there this spring was completely different. Now what's happening is illegals are coming across the border. They get 5 feet north of the border, and they sit and they wait for Border Patrol. And they come across in groups. And it seems like they just appear out of nowhere. The first group I saw was a group of women and children, about 12 of them. It was in the middle of the day, and it was in a place that was kind of hilly, and they were just sitting north of the border wall. And when Border Patrol came across the hill in their van, now Border Patrol's law enforcement, on the back of their uniforms it says Border Police. So this law enforcement van comes across the hill, and this group of 12 illegals stand up and get in line like they're waiting for a municipal bus. They were glad to see that van come because they knew they're going to get picked up, processed, and then sent somewhere else in the United States. I was with a group of, on that trip I was with a group of about 7 of us, I think. We camped for 3 days just about a quarter mile north of the border wall. One time we were driving along the border wall, there was nobody there. We came back, it was night, about 2 hours later, and we found 64 Guatemalans, all women and children. There was one person who spoke English who was recognized by other people in the group I was with, so she had been through the border multiple times. She was the only person that spoke English. We called Border Patrol, they come, they pick them up, it's the middle of the night, so we hung out took them a couple hours to process those, and so we got a chance through some interpreters to talk to some of these people. And they are absolutely not prepared to be in the United States, don't have skills, don't speak the language, and I think they have a pretty bleak future. And I think that another comment I want to make about the groups that I've seen. They seem to appear out of nowhere. They don't seem tired. They're all wearing clean clothes. They're not wearing a uniform, but they're all dressed kind of the same. They're clean. It's like they're organized. There's usually someone who appears to be the leader. And my observation is that this is being done on an organized basis on an industrial scale. And Border Patrol is part of that organization. Border Patrol processes them, and these people know that once they're across the border, they can stay in the United States. And every group I saw when I was down in the spring was just waiting north of the border. They weren't trekking across the border. And as I understand it from other people who are part of our team that have more experience on the border than I do, that the illegals are coming across the border near the town of Sassabee, but further east is where the drugs are coming across. And these illegals that are coming across are basically occupying or tying up Border Patrol so that they don't have time to go chase the folks that are actually bringing the drugs in. And with that, I'll end my remarks and stand for questions later.
Senator Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate this opportunity and for all the information that's been given. I wanted to pull up just a couple of pictures. So I was invited down to the border. In fact, Josh Gibbons, that's sitting over here to my right, had been there just the previous year and felt that it was really important for legislative members to come down and see what's transpiring. And as someone that represents Canyon County and now, of course, Ada County as well, this is and has raised my family there. I wanted to see what was transpiring because we know we've had problems over the last several years with things happening in our county with gang-related activities and drugs and that sort of thing. One of the other issues that has always been important to me also has been the human trafficking and the sex trafficking that has continued to occur. I've known for quite some time that Idaho has been a hub for sex trafficking, but in talking to our police, especially from Nampa, over the last couple of years, it's becoming more and more apparent that activities are taking place within Idaho, the Treasure Valley area, instead of it just being a trafficking hub through. And as a mother, that has always been something that's been very concerning. If you have not seen The Sound of Freedom, that has also started to bring into light what's been transpiring over the last little while and how that is happening in other countries and coming here. So we went down, Representative Gallagher was with me as well, and went to check out what was transpiring. It was an eye-opening experience. We spent 3 days and 2 nights at the border looking to see what was transpiring, taking to different areas. In fact, our first day there was over in a section of El Paso where the wall ends and there's a huge open gap. The cartels are just on the other side. Our guide was showing us how you can tell where the cartels are because on top of the homes they build little tent type areas where they sit and they watch what's happening on the United States side. We had a young gentleman, probably about 15 or 16 years old, that was following us on the American side, reporting back to the cartel of what we were doing. And our guide told us that we only had a little bit of time there because even though we're on the American side of the border, the cartels own that space. And it's an area where even Border Patrol won't even go anymore because it's too dangerous. So I just wanted to briefly run through some of these very quickly. There was just a report that was sent out actually by the National GOP. They send out reports every Friday, and their last one was on the illegal border crisis and immigration crisis. And I'll just say, I don't even call this a border crisis anymore. We all know that every state has a border crisis going on. It really has become a humanitarian crisis in many ways because of what's transpiring. And so I just want to run through these. We were there when Title 42 was getting ready to expire, and consequently we were at Gate 42 at the same time. But we had a bunch of news media there, and we didn't know if it was going to be a mad rush that was going to happen through the gates or if it was going to be really quiet and cordial. Border Patrol had been giving daily reports on what was happening. This day they did not, though, which was really interesting since there was so many news media there. So that's Gate 42 where we were at. Here's some of the Border Patrol. They went in to go into the gate and then come back out. They didn't really say a whole lot, and a bunch of the media there. We did venture over into Ciudad Juarez. It cost us 50 cents to get over and 35 cents to get back. We walked right in, toured around for a little bit, and then walked right back out for 35 cents. There we are inside of there. It was kind of fun. We had lunch. And there's cars that travel back and forth daily. You can either walk through back and forth or you can drive through. And coming over into it, we didn't have to give any identification or anything like that. Coming back, we did. This is at one of the churches that is known to house or help a bunch of the illegals that are coming through. The American Red Cross is there. Usually there are literally 1,000 or so people that are here getting kits. This is one of the signs that they had up on the thing, just basically saying these are areas of protection where you can be protected on the American side if you're illegal. So churches, schools, medical facilities, that sort of thing, and they're posted all over this church. This is one of the things that they had up there. Kind of interesting. That particular day, though, there wasn't as many people as what Josh had seen previously, and we'd been told by a lot of the locals that over the last couple of weeks, the government had been coming in, cleaning things up, shipping people out. In fact, 1,000 were sent over to Colorado just a couple days before we got there. But they had a bunch of porta potties that were just lined up all over the place, and you wouldn't need this many porta potties for 50 individuals. So We went into a bunch of the caves and tunnels where the illegals will wait for their rides when they get over to the American side. There's always a bunch of trash and phone cards and medications and clothing and different things. We went to the Bannon Gate, which was really an interesting place. This is a gate. It's about a mile or so long. It was paid for by private donations. It's on private property. The gate that you see here has been chained back, though, because of environmentalists. And so they're not able to close the gate. You can see Mexico's just on the other side of us there. Along the lines, and you'll see this in a minute, there are bricks of all the different individuals that donated money to build this wall. And from what we're told, it is a very good wall. We went along at night with our guides and saw many, many areas of the wall where things are just cut, things are falling apart. Sorry, these are not in an order, so I'm just kind of running through them. And you would see makeshift like wood pallets that were just like stuck in to cover the holes, sections of the wall that aren't even together anymore, and a bunch of steel that's been sitting for years to repair the wall that's still sitting there. Lots of trash, lots of children's clothing, shoes, backpacks. This is one of the sheriffs that we were with at one night. Capers, yes, Gray Capers. And he was with us. He was telling us, he's outside of the El Paso area, but he was telling us about all the things that have been happening in his area, the dead bodies that they find, and like I said, this is not even El Paso. They have these signs up everywhere, watch for unexpected pedestrians. As you're driving around the area, you might see people just running across the freeway over to the American side. And so they have these signs everywhere. Here's some more of the gate and the wall. Like I said, the pallets, and there's gaps everywhere, so people can just slide right through. There was a bunch of cars driving around that night, and we saw a bunch of buses too, which was interesting. This is kind of a view of what it looks like and how they prop it up right now. This is a man-made cave that we went into. A bunch of trash was in there, but they hide in there because it gets really hot in El Paso, and so they'll sit in here for hours on end sometimes until their rides get there to pick them up because it's nice and cool. So you go in there and you'll just find trash. And this wall, this cave that they showed us, they said has been getting longer and longer, and there's several different areas to go through it now. They haven't been through it all yet. But that's, and here's some of the trash. This was just outside Gate 42 where they brought in these dumpsters and just tons of clothing, tons of everything. This is an organization. This is in El Paso. This building that they have there, they want to turn into basically a sanctuary to be able to house the illegals when they come through. And there's been a bit of an uproar with that, with the locals. They don't want to see that happen. These are the bricks that I was telling you about at the Bannon, what they call the Bannon Wall, of the different individuals that have donated, and it goes quite a ways. They were telling us while we were at the Bannon Wall about a rape that happened with a young child on the Mexican side, and they had Border Patrol with them at the time, and there was nothing that could be done. They were sitting there yelling at the guy, trying to get him to stop, and he just looked at him like he knew that there was nothing that they could do, and so he just continued to rape the child. I'm just going to kind of run through these really quick. We saw people crossing over, being directed to a port of entry to be able to come in. So it's interesting just kind of watching. The night that Title 42 expired, there were several buses that were coming in, and we just sat there and waited with a bunch of the media there, and it was just interesting. I'll let Jason talk a little bit more about that, Representative Gallagher, about what she experienced that. But we saw in about an hour's time there was approximately 4 buses that came in, picked up about 40 individuals each time, so about 160 individuals to take them to processing, and that was just under an hour at one gate. Here you can see where they're getting ready to open it up, and the media was all there to see what was going to happen. And again, Title 42 expired that night, so that was the end of that. Just different letters. Oh, These are the rape kits. So Michael Young was talking about the Darien Gap, and they give out these rape kits because about 80% of the women and children, as they're making their way through, are going to be raped. And so they give them these rape kits that have male and female condoms, pills, and lubricant and instructions. So they give it to them so that they can take this with them as they're making their way to the United States. They also have what they call the rape panty trees. You can find those in El Paso and along the border in Arizona and in Texas, where once the victim has been raped, they take the panties off. The perpetrator takes the panties off and flings them into the tree, and so these trees are just covered with panties. We met with Governor Little's people, his staff, because we really felt we wanted to talk to them about what was transpiring. And we knew that they had just come back from their own time down there. I think for me in particular, the drugs are a big issue, and we know that. The fentanyl is a problem. It is in our state. It is in my county. But I think what even struck me even more so is just the other issues that are going on. You not only have the child and human trafficking, the sex trafficking that's happening, but you have a whole nother component. There is organ harvesting that's taking place and going into the black market. It's a very popular thing now that's transpiring. In talking to the sheriff that we were with down there, he told us about several victims, dead bodies that they found where their hearts had been taken out, different organs had been taken out, because there is organ harvesting that's taking place. The indentured servitude is a huge issue. What you've already heard about that is what's transpiring, and I think it's just becoming more and more so. Where people are being threatened with their lives, with their families' lives, once they basically sell themselves into servitude to be able to come here. They'll have houses with 50 or 60 people that are living in the United States that have been brought over by the cartel in various forms that are now indentured servitude victims, and they're told that you're going to work at this company, you're going to be here for this long, and if you try to run away or you try to get out of it early, we will kill you. We will kill your family. We'll make you a example to those around you. So that's a huge problem.
Senator.
Yes.
Senator, we're running short on time. So.
Thank you. Sorry. One last thing I wanted to say is just on the component of the people that are coming in. I just wanted to, and this is in my report, that they have caught 146 individuals so far. They're on the terror watch list. This continues to increase more and more. Border Patrol told us last year they were in the 90s with terrorist watch individuals that they had caught. We're at 146 that we've caught right now. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Representative Gallagher. Thank you.
So I just wanted to say, first of all, I wanted to do this because I wanted to see for myself what was happening down there. We've heard so many things and different stories of what's going on, and I wanted to actually see it for myself. And I was amazed and appalled, especially with the cutouts in the fence. Our guide showed us different parts of the wall, which I will call, there was a bush fence. It's a fence that can be cut through very easily. There was an Obama fence that could also be cut through very easily. And then there's the Trump wall, not so easily cut through. And there were portions in what we saw where the Trump fencing was just off to the side, ready to be built, ready for more wall to be created, but it's just sitting there. The materials are there. We can do this. Just recently, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a picture of parts of the wall down in Arizona that have been welded open for flooding. And this is just allowing immigrants to come through. One Ecuadorian migrant said that we thought the agents were going to say something to us, but we just walked right in. Last month, more than 42,000 migrants crossed the U.S. border in Arizona through those 14 floodgates that are now welded open. El Paso in July was at 24,352. So it's a huge number that are just coming through this opening. I wanted to say that my trip was not taxpayer funded. I did this on my own because I wanted to know for myself. I wanted to see it for myself. Tammy and I were not, this is not taxpayer funded trip. And I am appalled and disgusted with what I saw. And something needs to be done. A group of us are working on legislation, E-Verify, and there are concerned people that are willing to work on things in the legislature that we can do to help this problem, to help reduce the problem. So we are working on things. We are working on solutions.
Thank you so much. Representative Hill? You have about 2.5 minutes and 2.5 minutes for questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was supposed to go to the border here last Tuesday. I was canceled. I'm going to go this next Tuesday. I'm going to Eagle Pass, and I'll be going on my own dime, of course. And that's where they have the buoys, and that's where that controversy is down there. I wanted to make a report also on the guard issue. Back in May, I contacted the governor, and I wanted to see about getting the guard down to the border. That was kind of quiet. It didn't get a lot of publicity. We brought General Garshak in and realized under the rules of engagement and under the mission set, it was not prudent to send them for that mission. All they're doing down there is admin and moving porta potties around. So at this point, until we get a mission of really actually interdicting and actually doing something, the Guard is not going to provide much of a resource, at least for now. And I was going to make one comment as a China expert. And at the fentanyl issue, we discussed that a lot with a roundtable with the governor. That's the big issue. China is purposely sabotaging America with this. It is coming at us with the intent to disrupt and kill our people, and we stand by and do nothing. So I was aware of this in the military. There are missions available. There are ways to do things about this, but the will to execute that mission is not there. So that is very frustrating, as I sit on the sidelines as an old warrior. We can do something about this, and we choose not to. So there's so many conduits that apply here. And when I get back from my mission on next Tuesday, I will report.
Thank you, Representative Hill. Committee, are there any questions? I see none. We do. Senator Lakey.
We've got 5 minutes. I'll ask a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, senators, representatives, talked about, obviously, there are things that we can do in Idaho, we would like to do. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you think we could or should support our law enforcement in their efforts to support them, and then support our law enforcement to deal with the consequences of that border here?
I'll make a comment.
Senator Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was a member of the House, I worked on legislation that would have required E-Verify to be used by Idaho employers, and it would have been a defense if you used that if you were employing an illegal alien and you had gotten confirmation through E-Verify that that person was actually legal, and if the person hadn't used your E-Verify and employed an illegal alien, then that person would lose various governmental licenses. And so I didn't get that bill done, but we can bring that bill forward again.
Follow on?
Just a little more on the law enforcement side, if you would. Any of you. It doesn't have to be Senator Hart, Senator Nichols, representatives, whatever.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Lakey. I think we've heard a lot of good testimony about different needs that are happening in our state. So I think we need to take into account those needs, whether that be in providing changes into our laws to be able to, target the criminals that have been released from prison, or fixing our juvenile system, whatever that need is. But I think it goes further too. I think we need to start de-incentivizing things. There's a lot of incentivization that these people are being told to come to the United States. You can get all this stuff for free, that you can, all these things will be provided for you. How do we de-incentivize them? And I think there are ways to be able to do that. I don't have all the solutions, but again, we have a good panel that's been here today that has presented a lot of good information that we need to take into account, but we also need to look at what things we need to do to de-incentivize. I can tell you from someone that has been through an immigration process myself, living in another country, the standards that and the bars that were set for me to be able to be in that country were just amazing. It was mind-boggling that a country that I went to, which was Costa Rica, very small country, and the requirements that they had for me to be able to be in that country, that one of the United States, which is much, much larger than Costa Rica, and we barely have anything. There's things that have to be fixed on the federal level, so we need to be appealing to the congressional level to start working on these fixtures that we are needing. And so there's a lot of things we can do. I think the idea of pairing with Texas and some of these border states to be able to support, the states have to take the initiative. It's not going to be done on the federal level. It's obvious right now that that's not going to transpire. So the states have to take the initiative. We have sovereignty, our states do. We need to start exercising that sovereignty, protecting our states and being able to do the things that we need to do necessarily for protecting the citizens here. Again, the sex trafficking, the human trafficking, all that stuff's taking place. So what do we do to de-incentivize that and to be able to hold those accountable that are doing it? That's what we need to be looking at.
Okay, I see.
One comment, sir. We had a fentanyl roundtable with the governor here back in June, and it was with the police and the leadership. And one of the things that I put out that I think is really important is the fentanyl interdiction is like you de-incentivize, you have to come down hard on these guys. About the mules, and they're saying, oh, we need to give the mules a chance. No, you do not. There are no innocent mules in this. So you have to come down hard on these things. You got to shut it down. No one wants to come here for any possible way. That was the conclusion we got out of that fentanyl roundtable. And that's that from the law enforcement. All the law enforcement were shaking their heads, yes. And having that gateway out is something we have to look at very carefully, because like in the military, zero tolerance works. And any sort of a wiggle room is where they will go. If there's an opportunity, well, we're not going to do it here. They'll go to the little old lady. All little old ladies will be the mules. So you have to go down. You have to come down them hard, and that's what will shut this thing down. That's what I hope to pursue in this next session. That if someone dies from fentanyl, that person who provided that fentanyl, that'll be a charge of murder. So that will. I've already been discussing this with the AG, and that's coming forward. I'll be leading that forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Committee will take a lunch break. We will be back here at 1:30. We're dismissed. We'll now go ahead and start with our meeting in the afternoon meeting here. Our first presenter will be former Senator Larry Craig, whom we're pleased to have with us today. And we'll turn that time over to you. Now, Larry, I was a little lax in the last meeting. I forgot my standard, but please state your name for the record.
Mr. Co-Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, and members of the committee, I'm Larry Craig, retired U.S. Senator, with having had the great privilege of serving this state in the U.S. Congress for a period of 28 years. Representative Boyle asked a month or so ago if I'd come before the committee and update you and discuss with you PILT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes. And of course, when Idaho elected me to the 1st Congressional District in 1980, by then PILT was already a few years old, passed by the U.S. Congress in 1976. Acted into law that year and funded for the first time to go out to states and county governments at that time. Reminiscing backwards, it was in part a product of the Sagebrush Rebellion Western states like Idaho, led by states like Nevada especially, the Congress had become aware of the disparity of relationships that existed in states so effectively dominated by federal property ownership and property patterns that small counties simply could no longer afford the responsibility they had in county governance as it related to funding police and fire and rescue and all the kinds of things that other citizens outside the county who entered the county, in many instances to recreate on federal lands, were requiring. As a result of that, it grew and was passed into law in 1976. When I went to Congress, it was one of those things you stayed very current on, or at least I did, because I knew of its importance to our state and to our counties. And that if we didn't do something like that, because it was obvious that we were not going to sell off large amounts of federal land into state and or private ownership. That pattern was, while desired by many, including myself at times, it simply was no longer effective. By then, the love relationship that our public was having with federal lands and access to federal lands was rapidly growing. And the environmental movement, as we all know, was increasingly growing. And those lands were being looked at, if you will, as environmental sanctuaries for whatever purpose, be it wildlife or habitat, timberlands, and all of those types of things. So we continually pushed, but we were not effective in making sure that payments to our counties under the formula of the time, and it was primarily an acreage formula at the time, stayed constant with inflation and increased needs or even relationships, as you have all studied, between the property tax base in a county and comparable lands and federal and what that payment is. Starting in 2006, I began to work with NACO, National Association of Counties, and others to change the formula and to move PILT funding from discretionary to mandatory. And it wasn't until 2008 that we effectively made it a mandatory requirement of government that the Department of Interior enter into their budget every year an annual fixed PILT payment. And that payment should be considered as a relationship to inflation and comparable payments and costs. While that didn't happen in that nature, we did effectively in 2008 with the mandatory requirement bump up PILT by a substantial amount. That amount increased and the formula changed to a acreage population formula with states of, I think, up to 5,000 and beyond 5,000 was a break point in that formula. And you really have to go online to study it to understand it. I can only express it to you in rather simplistic terms. But having said that, from 2008 until 2015, PILT was mandatory. In 15 through 17, in other words, fiscal 16 and 17, it slipped back into discretionary. But thanks to our delegation and NACO, it is required and mandatory again, and there is some effort to maintain it and tie inflationary costs to it. Last year, our delegation, primarily Senators Crapo and Risch, along with Senator Lee of Utah, introduced a bill to study and the study to result in inflationary factors. They are aware, or their staff is aware, of your study and the comparables that you did examining the 3 counties that you examined. And that's going to be very, very helpful. I was on the phone with the Risch staff this morning telling them that I was going to encourage you to approach the delegation for a reintroduction of the legislation that they and Senator Lee introduced a year ago. It has not been reintroduced. And that would be to do the study and to tie inflationary factors to the amount of increase that PILT got on a regular basis. Senator Lee did offer it on the floor this year as a standalone amendment to an omnibus appropriation bill. It was primarily a point of discussion, if you will, and to mark the issue, and was not an effective amendment, did not get tied to the omnibus appropriation. But having said that, when I went to Congress in 1980 versus today, as you know, this year our state received 28 million plus, divided amongst our counties. Now that's spread over 32 million acres. So we're receiving slightly more than $1 an acre. And I think any of you who are owners of pasture lands and or grazing lands and or timbered lands know the kind of taxes you're paying on them. There are no comparables in any way. At the same time, cost of county government has gone up substantially, as we know that. And now that Idaho's become a prime recreation state, a national recreation state, many of our counties are subject to very high costs of search and rescues when we lose parties, be they float trips on the salmon, and you've got, or Clearwater County and Idaho County and others that are spending tens of thousands of dollars a year in helicopter costs and life-saving costs for those people. Some of it passed on, most of it not. And those have become very real factors, and why I am encouraging you to continue in your effort with our delegation to do so. You've got a friend in NACO. The National Association of Counties gets it, and they get it very well, and they want to see the inflationary indicator put in. I've talked of recent when Judy invited me, when Representative Boyle invited me to come before the committee, I reached out to them to talk about their currency in it. And if you look at their website, they remain very active in it because of its impact on counties. There are now 1,900 counties in the United States that in one way or another are recipients of PILT. And in many instances, this past year, nationwide, 578 million was distributed through PILT. The thing that is also remarkable about that, when I first started watching it in '76, when I was a state senator here, until now, PILT has sent to counties over $11 billion. So it has had a substantial impact. And you take any county today and extract from their annual budget PILT money, and they will find themselves with real problems. And they all vary in size, Elmore County being the largest recipient of it, Lewis County, because it's primarily a private land county, being the lesser recipient of it. But even here in Ada County, because of federal dominance on non-paying, non-taxable property that they hold and utilize here, they are recipients of it. So I'm glad and I thank you for being as focused and active as you have been on it. I only encourage you to kick the can down the road another time. I think it's important that our delegation hear from you and say, introduce it again, talk about it again, and then also your effective work with the National Association of Counties in accomplishing this. So it remains important. It will remain increasingly important as other restrictions are placed on our inability to return revenues from our public lands in one form or another, as that has increased over the last multiple decades, whether it be timbered land or grazing land or restrictions and therefore fewer grazing allotments, less cattle, for whatever reason is argued on behalf of the BLM or the U.S. Forest Service or Bureau of Reclamation. We have no national parks in Idaho, but we have other designated areas that can be income properties, but oftentimes are restrictive in their approach toward the public. Having said that, I hope that in some way addresses the issue and your thoughts, Madam Chairman, co-chairs. Be happy to respond to any questions any of you might have.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Craig, pleasure to see you, sir.
Thank you.
In your opinion, and in these discussions you've had recently, is maybe the best we can do is just an inflationary adjustment, or could we go in the direction that our study was showing, where the true value of the land currently, because that would be a lot more than just an inflationary adjustment. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I've always been of the mind never to miss the opportunity. And while budgets and tight budgets are and should be a major issue before the Congress today, I think all of us are concerned about debt. This is a relationship that is almost constitutional in its character. And I think you can make those kinds of arguments that cause you to argue that. And you folks have done your homework. You've got good examples of how we might do that. So yes, place the argument, go for the brass ring, or the gold ring in that case, but also push the inflationary factor. I think the Lee amendment was 10%, as it should be, based on inflationary costs of operating counties. So yes, do it and ask for all of it. Absolutely. And also look at the membership of your committees. When we were able to bump inflation and mandatory costs, and we did it intentionally, we had the right people at the committees. We had Pete Domenici of New Mexico and others, and I was on the Finance Committee, and we made those things happen because we were Westerners. And so don't miss that opportunity when it comes along.
Okay, Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Craig, thank you for your work. I remember your work with the counties, and it's remembered and appreciated. With that inflationary adjustment, does that, for all intents and purposes, make that amount that comes out of that formula mandatory, or is there still ability to say we're just not going to do PILT this year?
Senator Craig.
Thank you. Senator Lake, it's now currently mandatory, and it has been since 2018 again. So I don't think Congress is going to move from that. I won't say they won't, because they did move once for 2 years. But I think it's mandatory, and you argue inflation. In most mandatory expenditures today, inflation is a factor that they try to build in. And so I think it's reasonable to ask for it.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Craig, you also mentioned that there are some instances where our counties can seek reimbursement for their costs on federal lands, whether that's search and rescue, state firefighting efforts. Is there room for improvement there? How does that work?
Senator Craig.
It's on a case-by-case basis, from my understanding, and in all fairness, I'm probably speaking off my knowledge. Lack of knowledge is a better way of saying it. But I think what helps in the argument of the amount of money being received versus the requirements and the responsibilities that county government has as to all of those factors, from, police, fire, search and rescue, all of those. And now there's a new factor in, and that's environmental coordination, environmental cooperation. And I think it's reasonable to submit bills and to ask for it. And it serves two purposes. First of all, on a case-by-case basis, depending on where the fire started, what happened here, there, what were the arguments involved. You may get paid, but more importantly, it says to federal, state and federals, oh, those are real costs. Idaho is basking in its recreational activities today. Many of our small communities are beneficiaries of growing tourism and recreation. But that's simply retail revenue largely versus taxable fee property or activities. So in many instances, I've oftentimes thought who manages the flow and the float, if you will, on the Salmon River? It ain't state government, it's federal government. And so somebody gets lost there, and they fly helicopters in to pick them up, and you've got a $25,000 or $30,000 bill. Who ought to pay for that? Well, the feds are getting a fee. They ought to pay for it. So I think on a case-by-case basis, but it's an analysis you can look at. What's more importantly is that you submit the bill, whether you get paid or not, as it relates to the effectiveness of the cost and an ability to demonstrate what those costs truly are to a county based on external activity. Mm-hmm.
Senator Carson, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Craig, I just want to say Idaho County is one of my counties.
Oh boy.
And I appreciate everything you said and all the work that you've done in the past. I thank you for your information today. It's very helpful for me. Thank you.
Yes, you've got a big county, a lot of public land, and I've seen some of the costs that county has incurred, as have others, when it relates to those kinds of search and rescue needs and or fires.
Thank you. I think that's it, Senator Craig. We appreciate you coming and being with us today and for your comments, and they're well taken. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for asking me to participate. Your work here, and in this, specifically with this committee, I think is increasingly important. I've always been an advocate of states grabbing hold of their constitutional responsibilities and running with them. We've all become too much the victim of the federal largesse, and therefore we are quiet in areas we should not be quiet in. And this is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now hear from Mark Kressler, Aon CEO. Mark, please state your name and who you represent.
Thank you to the chairs. Thank you to the committee for the invite. Name is Mark Kressler, CEO of Aon AI. We are an artificial intelligence and machine learning entity. We specialize in economics. The primal theory of economics is that all things, all transactions, break down into three common factors. The wood from this desk, the steel from these microphones, all come down to the three common factors of land, people, and time. Combining those elements, in economics called land, labor, and capital, combining those three elements creates an economy. Within a geographic boundary, the combined effects of land, people, and time creates a maximum potential GDP. That GDP, depending on how the land is regulated, translates into standard of living. When a state, my home state, Utah, has 67% of its lands in federal use, that caps the potential GDP and caps the ability to compete, caps the ability to generate revenues. Our company was focused on real estate, land, and the commercial industries. We pulled information in, 65 to 80 different pieces of information down to a parcel level, and we're able to calculate the value of property, not only the value that people would trade for the property, but what could be generated from the property. In other words, what was the productive capacity for that property? This was about 4 years ago. State of Utah found out what we were doing, invited us and said, is it possible to do this level of analysis on an individual parcel, but expand that to 50 million parcels or 50 million acres? And our response was, the computer really doesn't care whether it's a single parcel or multiple. We are able to take that same information and apply it into the server systems, and the size really wasn't a concern. So they asked, is it possible that we could look at the valuation of property on a mass scale and attribute whether or not there was a differential in property tax payments versus the property taxes that were being assessed? Well, the best way to explain how that can happen is the systems take mass amounts of data. We can pull in not only the value of the property, but also its productive capacity and compare it to the PILT payments. As we looked at this PILT issue, we're not politicians, we are a tech firm. What it looked like to us was in 1976, when the PILT Act was enacted, what you had a bunch of appraisers, and appraisers would take Polaroids onto a legal form and look for comparable sales. At that point, the federal government said, we don't know what the value of this property is. You don't know what the value of this property is. It's impossible to value, to a traditional appraisal methodology, 35 million acres. So we'll pay you 50 cents an acre. And back in 76, that number was a decent number, and it was accepted. Over time, as you know, the next year, and the question became, well, what do we do this year? Still can't evaluate it. You don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. Let's use inflation, CPI index. So over time, there's this increase in payments based on CPI. However, real estate values, of course, have increased significantly over the CPI, and there's a delta. Question, of course, is what is that delta? How great is that delta, and how do we quantify it? State of Utah gave us their tax information. We crunched it, put it through the machine learning system, and found that roughly on 21% of the private lands in the state of Utah, Utah was getting close to $3 billion in property taxes. The other 62% of federal lands, outside of also the SITLO lands, the 62% was generating $40 million a year. So we saw this massive delta, and then the question that everyone had was, how do we quantify this? How do we determine what is a viable amount that should be paid for these properties? I'm going to walk through, we issued a report last year for your committee. We did a pilot program on 3 counties. We issued a report last year. I'm going to assume that that has been read. We're going to go through, if we could, and talk about a few of the points on that report, and talk a little bit about the software, how it operates, and what we can also work with within the state boundaries and requirements that the state sets on that software. In 2022, the state of Idaho received. Thank you. 2022, the state of Idaho received slightly more than $35.8 million in PILT and more than 32 million acres, which was approximately $1.10 per acre. The study that we were engaged took into account about 4% of the total federal acres in the state, which was Boundary Canyon and Clearwater counties. Off of that, from that portion of the state, there were 1,339 acres of federal lands. State of Idaho received $1,837,509 in PILT tax on those properties. After it was run through the machine learning and values were attributed for each one of these parcels, they were run in various instances of lowest common denominator. In other words, the 25 percentile of comparable approach. That same 1.8 million based if the properties were used for recreational land use only. And this would be PILT payments or property taxes equivalent just for recreational properties. Was $16,078,105, which is nearly 9 times the amount of the PILT payments that were made by the federal government. As we made those various land use adjustments, including timber use, that number increased to was 5 times, which is $10,189,000. Inheld federal lands, these were to us, these were a bit of the bread and butter. These are parcels that lie within the city boundaries. You know, these are not conservation lands. These are not lands up in the mountains. These are lands that are within cities. Very easy to determine like for like property tax ratios. The different 753 acres of inheld federal land. These are acres that are located within 1/4 mile of the city boundary within these test counties. PILT payments for these properties was $1,752. If the established property taxes, estimated property taxes based on like for like, that number would have been $113,000, or 65 times the current PILT payments. Fair market value of those properties would have been $14 million. Again, development for property, not just within a city, but outside the city boundaries, within an annexable area, which was determined at about a half a mile from the city boundaries. Within those 3 counties, there were 1,403 acres of federal land. PILT payments for those was $3,103. The payments that should have been attributed if it was a private party, $200,000, which again was 65 times the current PILT payments. I'm going to swing over to a report we did for the entire state of Utah. And again, here in Idaho, we did a small portion, and again, sample for sample. But let's take a look at what happens when we apply it to an entire state. And again, here is my quote earlier: private land, 21%, $2.9 billion in revenue, property taxes, whereas federal land at 65% was $40 million. We know there's a delta. CPI versus HPI. So in Utah, we did the entire state of Utah. 217,000 acres of inheld lands within the cities of the state of Utah. PILT payments on those lands were $505,000. The tax equivalent amount, if they were paying as a private party for those same inheld lands, was $131 million. When we took 1 mile from the Utah city boundaries, again, these are federal lands that lie within a mile of a city boundary, which would allude that those properties could have access to primary utilities and annexation. There were 441,000 acres of federal land. PILT payments on those acreages was $843,000. The tax equivalent amount, if it was a private party, would have been $227 million. Again, together, if we take the property within the city limits and the additional mile, PILT payment was 1.4.
Mark, hold on just a second.
You bet.
Is everybody able to find where he's at in your material? Page 10 and that. Got it? Okay, sorry.
You bet.
Go ahead.
PILT paid by the federal government for these very developable parcels, $1.4 million, tax equivalent amount, $344, if again paid by a private party. On the next page, we talk about unimproved recreational property, the balance of 32 million acres. PILT paid to Utah, $40.9 million. Property tax equivalent as unimproved recreational property should have been $180 million. The property tax equivalent as unimproved recreational property plus the properties have been held within the cities, $309, and property tax equivalent as unimproved recreational property plus the city limits, within the city limits, and 1 mile from the city limits would have been $534 million. The disparity, obviously, is quite significant. The greater questions then become, now what? If before, up into this point, it's been almost impossible to quantify what those values are or what the property taxes should be. And by true nature, if USPAP, which is United States Policy and Procedure, for appraisers, a human appraiser could not do that, much less do that every year. Technology, of course, has grown by leaps and bounds. I don't know how many of you have used ChatGPT. ChatGPT, of course, an artificial intelligence. And what happens with artificial intelligence is we feed it data. The more data we feed it, the more accurate and the sharper it gets. What we've done in the software, the way that the software operates, is we take every single parcel. We take about 65 to 85 different pieces of information. Our background, the company was founded as a background, the background was the developers. We were real estate developers with an economics background. And so what happens is we pull all the information in that would be necessary to understand how a property could be developed out. That would take into account soils, flood zones, topography, zoning, what the zoning would allow, setbacks, what people are paying for property for those types of zones. What are the build costs to achieve the production on those parcels? What could the homes be sold for? What's the inflation? What is the home price appreciation? All that information is gathered, aggregated, and brought down to the parcel level, so that every parcel, we're able to see two different factors, and we'll go into the software here in a bit. We're able to see two different factors. What, one, the sales comparable approach on a property is. If more than 5, 6 people have purchased, there have been purchases, transactions, what is the sales comparable value for that property? Secondly, and from an appraiser's perspective, even more accurately, is what can be produced and what is the value of what can be produced on that property. Those are compared together, and we're able to determine valuation on property. The beauty of that methodology is it's not a black box. Every one of the variables that goes into determining those values is changeable by the user, and ranges are set by the user. So as accuracy, as we look at accuracy in these types of models, we look at ranges of value. So, for example, if someone were to say, that property's worth $10,562,162, it's probably not accurate. In reality, it's a range between a minimum and a maximum, and there's what we call a standard deviated range between those. And the various factors that go into that valuation help determine that range of value. If I could, I'm going to jump into the software real quick and just real quickly talk about each one of those layers that goes into the valuation. And I'm going to go into smaller city. We pull in zoning. Zoning tells us what we can build on a piece of property. It tells us the total output of production. And as we talk about that, I want to just pause for a second. There are multitudes of value that are missed because a property is in federal custody. First, there's the differential between the property tax. And those numbers are quite significant. And again, we think they're about at least a 10x differential. Second, there is the property tax if the property would be developed out. We call that the total built out tax. And what that is let's say you have 10 acres and it allows 10 homes per unit, so you have 100 potential units or homes. Each one of those homes, at say $350,000, has a property tax associated with it. That property tax is significant even in comparison to the land property tax. The software can also calculate that level of taxation, and could identify that not only are we missing out on the potential property taxes for the land, but if it were developed, and again, most of the properties that are held will have the ability to be developed, they have the infrastructure and the zoning, it would be significantly larger than that. Then there's the third tier. The third tier is what can that land produce? Jobs, services that provide retail sales taxes, et cetera. Population can accommodate more people. And those people bring with them, of course, a household income, and that household income is taxed and spent on retail sales, which goes to retail sales taxes. The point is you could also, not only could you take a case about the differential in PILT payments, but also in the loss of production, which makes the PILT payments, again, not to be redundant, just a small tip of the iceberg. Future land use on properties. This is great for when we do counties. We bring in zoning for counties. Future land use takes into account natural resources, what can be associated on property. Soils, we're able to rule out soils that wouldn't be buildable. Of course, the argument would be if I was with those that would predict set PILT payments or offer values for PILT payments, you can't use everything in the state of Idaho. Software, of course, rules out property or soils that would be difficult in building, or if the soil is compressible and can be built on, there is a differential added to the ground cost, grading cost, and construction costs. Flood zones, rules of flood zones, topography. Of course, we're going to have areas that cannot be built in the state of Idaho. Utilities, we bring in utilities. Certainly, there's parcels that can't be developed unless they have the basics: water, sewer, power. Software brings all of these necessary infrastructure elements into the software so that we can calculate what can be built and what can't be built on property. Geologic hazards, fault zones, areas that are flood prone or landslide prone, traffic counts. All of these, of course, go into retail sales, et cetera, to determine what could be developed on a piece of property. And let's go look at how property is evaluated. Again, you'll notice two pieces here: intrinsic value of land and the market value of land. Market value of land is the comparable approach. If we were to take, as a normal appraiser does, and you go out and you find other transactions of like kind, we come up with the market value of land. Intrinsic value is a little bit different. It's if we were to develop this property out based on its current zone, how would that turn out as a return on value over time? All of these, of course, estimate how many homes would be built, how many people would be in those areas. But more particular to this body is the property taxes. So, for example, the property that I just clicked, actual property tax is zero. It's in a green belt. PILT is $1.10 per acre. Change in property tax, if it were not federal and it was private, would be $100,235. If, however, the property were to be developed as a lots for parcels, that same property tax be $435,000 a year, and a total built-out property tax. If you were to put homes on that infill parcel, the property tax would be $2.9 million. Again, a very great differential in value. So there's an economic differential here. We've completed the initial PILT analysis. We're looking at doing the entire state, doing analysis for the state. A couple of pieces of information that I think that would be of import is as we've worked with other states, state of Nevada, state of Idaho, we've talked state of Mexico, of Wyoming. There is a sense of a wanted alliance between the states. So that if a singular state were to go back to the Department of Interior and say, look, here's the differential in tax. You paid us $40 million. We think it should be more in the lines of $200 million. There could be even greater strength if other states were part of that effort and going back to redefine what those PILT payments should be. There is a momentum of other entities and states that would love to ally with the state of Idaho in that realm. Lastly, as we looked at this, we asked ourselves the question, and again, we're not politicians, we're tech guys, so that this is a foreign habitat for us. As you know, as we looked at it, we asked the question, and we see this delta between the PILT payments and private payments, and we ask ourselves, who's footing that bill? Because of the lack of information, because of the lack of transparency on values, it's being estimated based on CPI who's paying that bill. And as we've listened to the many different politicians from the different states, what we've seen is a bipartisan agreement. We've had very little pushback from the many county commissioners and state legislators and state senators. And I think what it comes down to is most of them say the same thing. We want a fair PILT payment because the person that's paying the bill in most states is the kids. In the state of Utah, 54% of our education budget comes from property taxes. And if we can increase the property taxes with the federal government, that would go to our children. And with that, I will open up the floor for questions.
Committee, are there any questions? You've either really been very thorough or were very confused. Go ahead, Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure which one I am, but is these metrics that you're showing right here, was that available in the pilot program that we had? I just don't remember it in our, okay, maybe I didn't dig deep enough then, forgive me, Mark. Good. That's important information, I think, for us to have as we look at this, and thank you for developing all this. As you've heard the discussion earlier with Senator Craig, it's still something very important to most of us on this committee, and trying to get some parity there between what that land value is and what we're having to deal with for the benefit of our county. So I really appreciate you guys working on this. It's a great program.
Thank you.
Representative Horman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for being here and sharing this with us. When we originally passed this resolution to initiate this study 2 or 3 years ago, I think we were about second out of the gate with following Utah. What's happened since then? Are other states, I'm assuming it's the western states where the feds own most of the land, or control it at any rate. What's happening in other states? Is there interest in other states in joining forces, as former Senator Craig mentioned?
Mr. Kressler.
Thank you. The answer to that would be we see tremendous momentum. We've worked with Arizona. We've had conversations with California, Montana, Wyoming, Nevada. And again, it has been, I'm going to try to dial back any hyperbole, it has been almost complete bipartisan consensus that the value of being able to define what these lands are worth and taking them back to the Department of Interior for a conversation. It seems that it is, to one state senator in Montana, it's Moneyball. In other words, if they're paying $40 million now and we go in with a quantified down to the parcel level, which will be difficult for them to defend our argument, because what are they going to use? An appraiser? Very likely they would use the software. Very likely they would put in various elements that would change the ranges. Whatever they do, it's going to, from a statistical aspect, it's going to bring those values up. What that is and how we approach it, that's a great question. We can, make the highest offer that is rationally available in that range, or we go mid-range and let them come down to some number. Whatever it is, if Utah, for example, is being paid $40 million a year, and it looks like it should be $500 million, if we can double those funds to $80 million, we won. And that is the general consensus we're seeing from most of the states. Utah, of course, we've completed the analysis, and we are continuing to do the analysis. We update it every month, and so that's available for them. We met with all of the county commissioners in Nevada 3 weeks ago. It was unanimous in that commission. They want to move forward. They're on a biannual, of course. Montana, the momentum is significant. It would seem, and again, what's the difference? What has changed? And the answer is really simple. The technology is there to quantify the value of the lands, whereas before in 1976 it was impossible. In reality, in 2005 it was impossible, and in 2010 it would have been partly accurate. Now, with the amount of data that has been digitized and with computing power and the ability to run mass data through an AI core, there's no longer an excuse not to know what the value of the property is.
Follow-up?
A follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment to share with the committee. As we consider solutions to the property tax problem that we have in Idaho, knowing that, roughly 30% of our lands can only be used to generate resources, and we get often dinged in Idaho for having a low per pupil spending amount. One, we don't fund that way, so I put almost zero credibility on that number. But two, if you're a Connecticut or an Iowa, a New York, a Kansas, where it's literally less than 1% of your land, of course you can spend more money per pupil because you can generate more money. And as the population of Idaho continues to explode, it's increasing the pressure of an increased population with the same amount of land and ability to generate revenue. So as we move forward, I hope this committee will consider that not only is this a fair thing to do to request reasonable HILT payments, but to recognize that this can help us solve our property tax crisis in this state. Thank you.
I don't see any other comments. We thank you so much for the presentation and the materials that you have brought to us, and we appreciate you coming and being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So, committee, we're going to have Kristen Ford come forward and talk to us about something that's really new to me. So, would you go ahead, Kristen, and show us where this is in our packet? Tell us where it is.
Hello, committee. Yes, this is sort of in the nature of an administrative housekeeping thing, but I wanted to get everyone up to speed since there are new members on the committee. In your packet, you should have a handout that says First Amendment to Agreement. It's just a single double-sided sheet. And then there's also a copy of the contract that was signed by the committee co-chairs 1 year ago. And so this single sheet is an amendment to the larger contract that was entered into last fall. And the purpose of the amendment is to clarify the access to the database. So we had contracted for access to EON's database, which is great, but we hadn't really thought about, okay, who's going to access it and when. And so the committee last fall started working through those issues, and I've enclosed a copy of the minutes also from the November 2022 so that you can see the summary of some of those discussions. And you'll see on the, if you have the November minutes in front of you, about 2/3 of the way down, there's bold print where Representative Horman moves that a lead person within LSO be appointed to assist the committee members and designees with access to the software. 2 paragraphs further down, there's discussion about who can access the database, and there's discussion about having that be the legislative members of this committee and anyone else that's designated by the speaker or pro tem. And on the top of the back page of that, there's you'll see the motion to approve the report along with the amendments that they were discussing. So the point of this is that most of us are not, certainly I am not any kind of a whiz kid when it comes to these technology databases. And pursuant to the contract that we entered into last fall, we have 20 hours of consulting services with EON at no extra charge. After that, I'm assuming that we would be paying their regular consulting charge. So we want to get as much mileage out of those 20 hours as we can, and we think that the best way to do that would be to have someone in LSO receive the training and then hopefully be able to turn around and in turn train the rest of us. We have in mind for that position Erin Phipps, because she's a great, whiz at the data visualization and that kind of thing with the budget, and she's agreed to take that on if the committee wants to do that. So what we've done here is just memorialized those amendments into this double-sided sheet here, and the key points are under number 2, where we say that the independent contractor, which is EON, shall provide access to the data tool for current members of the Committee on Federalism, the client's designated staff member of LSO, and any other joint designee of the Speaker of the House and President Pro Tem of the Senate. And then we go on to say that we'll be able to work informally with EON in terms of letting them know by email who our designee is going to be and if there are any changes in the future to that. Let's see. The rest of it has to do with agreeing that we're not going to just try to put this database on our website and let everyone in the world use it and therefore infringe on EON's trade secrets. And then on the back side, there's an addendum regarding those consulting services and how we're going to use up those hours by coordinating them through that designated person of LSO so that we don't spend them recklessly. So that is the discussion I had on those amendments. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I think that we're ready to get the amendment signed so that we can start getting Aaron trained on the database and start accessing the data.
Thank you, Kristen. Are there any questions? Committee, I believe that we have to move forward, we have to have a motion, and I think we've got two of them. So go ahead, Senator Lakey. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm always happy to hold Sage's coat if you want to go first. Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the First Amendment to the agreement for our federal land appraisal. I think it's important, and maybe it just wasn't fully contemplated in the original agreement, but we need to be able to appropriately use the information that we get as a result of this. So okay. I would make that motion.
We have Representative Dixon as second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Kristen. Okay. We'll next move on to Attorney General Raul Labrador. We appreciate you coming and being with us, and it's good to see you in America. The last time I saw you.
Anyway, we were in a fun place.
Yes, we were. Okay. Go ahead and state your name and stuff for the record, and thank you.
So for the record, we were in Italy, and it was my first time. I don't know if it was the chairman's first time, and it was an amazing experience. So we just saw each other as we were having lunch in the same place. But it's an honor to be here with you, Co-Chair Burtonshaw, Co-Chair Boyle, and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here with you as Idaho's Attorney General. One of the most important responsibilities I have is safeguarding our state's sovereignty from federal overreach. The Biden administration's continued attempts to unlawfully expand its authority over states like ours have been a concerning challenge for a long time. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution strictly limits the federal government to specific enumerated powers, leaving other matters to the states. Unfortunately, today we face a federal bureaucracy that enacts rules regarding what kind of car you can drive, whether you can build a house on your own property, and what you can do on public lands. And that's why I think this committee is so important. I think it's one of the most important committees in the legislature that looks at the overreach and what we can do as a state to fight back on these issues. Fortunately, I think for the state of Idaho, the tide is turning against federal agencies that overstep their bounds. Just this year, the Supreme Court ruled against the Environmental Protection Agency after they told a North Idaho family that they could not build a house on their own land. You all are familiar with the Sackett ruling, and that was a very important ruling, not just for the state of Idaho, but for the United States, and it's turning a tide in the fight against federal overreach. In another significant victory, my office successfully opposed the Biden administration's proposed Waters of the United States rule, which threatened to subject Idaho to excessive federal control over our waterways. We're just at the initial stages of that, but we were able to get the court to rule in our favor in a preliminary injunction, and that has been a huge thing for the state of Idaho. A federal court issued an injunction against the EPA's implementation of this rule in Idaho and Texas. In fact, there were two separate lawsuits. The state of Idaho chose to join Texas, and as some of you may remember, I was criticized for joining that lawsuit instead of going to the other lawsuit. Not only was our case decided first, months ahead of the other lawsuit, but if you read both opinions, if our case and the other case that was also successful, most of the holding was based on the first case's holding. So we were a leader in making sure that we did the right thing for the state of Idaho, and we led all the other states on this, and I think that's really important. Our office has also written a letter rebuking EPA's proposed new rule on power plants. We joined a West Virginia-led coalition of 21 states opposing the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's proposed new rule on existing coal, natural gas, and oil-fired power plants. The proposal attempts to regulate those plants under the Clean Air Act by imposing more stringent emission standards. It ignores completely last year's rebuke from the U.S. Supreme Court in West Virginia versus EPA, which warned that EPA should not use a narrow regulatory provision to force coal-fired power plants into retirement en masse. The letter explains how the proposal violates the Supreme Court's decision on West Virginia versus EPA because Congress hasn't given EPA the clear statutory authorization to remake the electricity grids. And this is important. These are all the fights that are happening in the courts right now, is state attorneys general are telling the courts that they need to hold against any administration that decides to go outside of the boundaries of their statutory capabilities and authority. And I think that's really important that we do that at the federal level. We also joined a letter joining 25-state coalition opposing President Biden's attack on gas-powered vehicles. We challenged the Biden administration's most radical regulations on tailpipe emissions. The president's plan would forcibly phase out gas-powered vehicles and restructure the automobile industry around EVs at breakneck pace. The draconian proposal aims to boost certain EV sales from 8.4% of total vehicle sales today to 67% by 2032. The Environmental Protection Agency plan move would damage our economy, undermine the reliability of our electrical grid, tax the families and businesses who depend on them, and threaten our national security. The Biden administration, to gain support from the progressive left, has decided to essentially force a new climate tax on Americans. The president's plan forcibly phases out gas-powered vehicles, despite the program failing to meet the environmental and economic goals it purports to achieve. We will not willingly allow the Biden administration to appease their base at the expense of everyday Americans, and our office will continue to fight things like this. America's power grids not only lack the capacity, as all of you know, we lack the capacity to accommodate 67% of cars being put on the electric grid and all these new demands. The average EV, as all of us know, sold for $61,448 at the end of 2022. Most, if not the vast majority of families in the state of Idaho could not afford to buy these vehicles. Now is not the time for the federal government to complicate the manufacturing process for cars and raise the average price significantly. We also we actually led 8 states opposing the new BLM rule. There was a letter to the BLM opposing its proposed conservation and landscape health rule. The new rule proposed by the BLM allegedly enhances provisions for the agency to protect intact landscapes, restore degraded habitat, and make wise management decisions based on science and data. The new rule would allow the agency to lease land for conservation use. The proposed rule attempts to create agency authority where none exists. Under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, Congress did not grant executive branch agencies the power to define new uses under the statute. The letter sent to the BLM makes clear that the BLM not only lacks the authority under the FLPMA Act, but that the proposed rule violates existing case law and would cause detrimental harm to the state of Idaho. We also joined a 20-state coalition in letter pushing back against other EPA rules. In this coalition, we commented on proposed EPA regulations regarding ethylene oxide and related emission standards promulgated under the Clean Air Act. I'm confident that courts will continue to strike down rules that infringe on our state sovereignty and the rights of the citizens. It's really important to note what the courts have been doing lately. They have been really limiting the authority that these executive agencies have and have required that there's explicit guidelines and rules within statute that allow the agencies to do the things that they're doing. We also have joined the fight on securing America's borders. You know, as you all remember, when I was in Congress, I was the chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee. I was at the time one of the foremost experts on immigration in Congress. And one of the questions that I was asked when I was running for this office, are you going to be able to work on immigration issues? And there's a lot of things that we can do out of the state of Idaho on immigration. We sued the Biden administration over unlawful open borders policies. I sued the Biden administration over its proposed new circumvention of lawful pathways rule because it fails to mitigate out-of-control illegal immigration. The Biden administration's proposed plan to address the surge of illegal border crossings, as all of us know, is inadequate. The proposal carves out exceptions restricting DHS from effectively combating unlawful entry into the United States. If the Biden administration were serious about securing our borders, they would reintroduce the Migrant Protection Protocol. The federal government has characterized the new rules as a means for continuing to regulate immigration since the expiration of the CDC Title 42. That policy gave authorities greater ability to bar illegal immigrants. We also joined 23 state coalition against Biden's administration's unlawful immigration policy. I joined an amicus brief led by Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares in the case of Florida versus Mayorkas, supporting the state of Florida's lawsuit against the Biden administration's unlawful immigration policy, creating a dangerous crisis at our southern border. Rather than detaining illegal immigrants, as the law requires, the Biden administration has released those encountered at the border into the United States. This policy flagrantly violates our current immigration policies. I think you heard from Joe Edlow this morning, who was my chief counsel when I was in Congress, and we worked a lot on these issues. And I think you heard some really good ideas from him on what we could be doing at the state level. But I'm trying to do my part as your Attorney General to fight these issues from my office. We also challenged the Biden proposal to expand Obamacare for ineligible aliens. If you remember, I think this was a historic moment in Congress when President Obama was speaking to Congress. This was the year before I got there. He was saying that Obamacare would never be given to illegal aliens. And if you remember, there was a member of Congress who got in trouble. Why did he get in trouble? Because he yelled out that you lied. And everyone, the entire media went after him, saying that he was wrong for speaking to the president that way, that the president wasn't lying, all those different things. Well, interestingly, at the time, it was in their draft, number one, and they took it out of the draft. But even more interesting, now look at it these few years later, that they're actually doing exactly what this congressman said that they were intending to do, which is to give Obamacare to people that are here unlawfully. We also join on an amicus calling on SCOTUS to reverse course on Chevron. And I think this is really important for this committee to understand, because I'm going to tell you the problem that we have at the federal level, we also have it at the state level. At the federal level, the courts have given a lot of deference to executive offices when they issue rules. And the courts have made it pretty clear. It's a doctrine that we call Chevron deference. And I joined 27 states led by West Virginia to file an amicus brief in the United States Supreme Court. And I called on the court to grant cert in the case of Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, and to correct an earlier decision in Chevron USA versus Natural Resources Defense Council that has paved the way for administrative overreach. Chevron has been interpreted by lower courts to require deference to an executive agency's interpretation of statutes that it administers and that may be ambiguous. The Chevron deference doctrine has made our country less democratic and provided the executive branch with inordinate power. Idahoans did not elect federal agencies to legislate for them. Overturning Chevron is a vital step in curbing bureaucratic overreach and putting power back in the hands of the voters. The 1984 decision to defer interpretations of a statute to federal agencies was wrong. Federal agencies extending their authority through statutory interpretation in ways Congress never intended can lead to unreasonable actions. The founders never intended for the executive branch to wield such power. The Loper-Bright case concerns a regulation by the National Marine Fisheries Service that require herring fishing boats to have an additional person on board to monitor compliance with federal regulations. The problem is that the federal agency has tried to shift the cost of that requirement to the fishing companies. So the federal government said, you must have this on your boats and you have to pay for it. This requires forcing them to pay the federal official salary, which would cost around $700 daily for each fishing boat. Now, why is this so important to Idaho? Not only is it important because it affects our relationship with the federal government, but we have the same problem with our state agencies. I get asked on a daily basis as your Attorney General whether a state agency can do an act or can do certain things, and you look at the regulations and you look at the statute and you realize that in the statute, it doesn't say that the agency can do that. But our courts have interpreted the power that these agencies have very broadly and has allowed them to do some of the things that they're doing that I don't think they have the authority to do under statute. And I think you as legislators can actually take care of that and can limit the power that the courts have in giving deference to the administrative agencies. I think you should be more careful, with all due respect. You should be more careful in the way that you write the statutes and in the way that you allow the agencies to enact the regulations, because there are many, many regulations in the state of Idaho that if you look just at the statute plainly, they shouldn't have the authority. But because it has some link to the statute, they're allowed to do it through the legal interpretation that the courts have given it and the deference that the courts have given these administrative agencies. And I think you have the ability, if you're interested, in limiting that deference that the courts are giving to these executive agencies. I also joined a letter with 25 other states fighting back against the Federal Office of Management and Budget. In this coalition, we push back against the OMB proposed rule change to increase state regulation. OMB suggesting a rewrite of Circular A4, which tells federal agencies how to do their cost-benefit analysis. Once again, the Biden administration is attempting to game the rules to unlawfully exercise more control over the states. The OMB proposal to change the way federal agencies conduct cost-benefit analysis will be used by federal bureaucrats to justify unnecessary spending and new regulation. A thorough cost-benefit analysis requirement places an important check on federal administrative powers and protects Americans against bad policy. We also joined a letter opposing FDIC special assessment. We joined a coalition of 9 attorneys general urging the FDIC to reverse course on its proposed rule to impose a special assessment on banking organizations. That would be ruled as an effort to recover the cost of bailing out elite depositors. If you remember the SVP debacle that just happened at the beginning of this year, they went out of their statutory authority and they gave the SVP, they bailed them out and bailed out the creditors, and then now they're forcing other people to pay for that, and they don't have the authority to do that, and we have opposed that. I'm going to finish with this. I promise, there's a lot of other things that we have done at this state, but I don't want to bore you more than I already have. I promised that I would be much more aggressive in fighting executive overreach when I ran for this office. In my first few months in office, I have participated in more than 100 multi-state lawsuits and led 7 of those legal efforts. A reporter in Idaho asked for us to tell them how that differed from the prior administration and the prior years in the Office of Attorney General. When they asked the question, I had no idea because we hadn't been counting. So they asked for a FOIA request, and we decided to count exactly. So we had joined or participated in more than 100, led 7 of the legal efforts. From 2003 through 2022, prior to my administration, the Office of Attorney General participated in approximately 33 efforts. I was in all those years, and we have already participated in 3 times that amount just in the few months that I have been in office. The principle of federalism that this committee wishes to protect is at the heart of the greatness of our nation. The greatest battles for the soul of our nation are happening right now in the federal courts. And I will continue to fight to protect the rights of our great state, to be free of undue influence and interference from the federal government. And I thank you for the opportunity to address this committee. Thank you very much.
Attorney General Labrador, are there any questions? I see none.
Mr. Chair?
There is
Sorry,
one.
I'm late on the button.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And it's frustrating sometimes from a legislative standpoint to try and push back against the federal government. We need that support of our law enforcement within the executive branch, I think, to make it effective. So I'm very happy with the work that you've been doing. Just a quick question in Chevron. Are our state courts pointing to Chevron as precedent, or are they just assuming that
They have their own doctrine that is similar to Chevron, and they give undue, in my opinion, undue deference to the administrative state.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
We got one more question. Representative Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you, Raul. And what do they call that, the state?
You know, I knew you were going to ask, and we were just talking about it, and my mind just went blank, but I will get that information to you.
That would be good.
Absolutely. I will get that information to the committee.
One follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Attorney General. Is that something we should write in each one of our statutes, or just have a statute saying for them to limit that?
I think there's different ways that you can do it. One, you could have one statute specifically talking about the jurisdiction, the power that the agencies, you could speak to the agencies themselves. This is what statutory power you're giving them to write regulations, or you could do it in every single statute. So
One would be easier.
and it would be great if you did both.
Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Attorney General, appreciate all your efforts as well in pushing back. As far as some of our legal challenges that we're pursuing, are part of the arguments that we're making the whole issue of federal executive order versus congressional action.
Mm-hmm.
And are we pushing back because it was an executive order versus an act of Congress?
So we're mostly pushing back because they were executive orders. That's a great question. And I'm sorry, I should be going through the chair. Mr. Chair, Senator Lakey, it's most of the actions that I've talked about are because they are executive orders, and we're pushing back. But we're also fighting on things that are a little different. For example, in the Second Amendment, we've had a bunch of states that are passing laws that we think are going outside of the constitutional boundaries of the Second Amendment, and we're pushing back. So we're filing amicus briefs on Second Amendment issues where we're joining other coalitions, where we're pushing back even on what some of the states are doing to try to take away our Second Amendment rights. Because what ends up happening is that they're trying to regulate businesses, for example, or regulate different industries. And by doing that, if they can be successful in their state, then it's going to have an effect on our manufacturers here in Idaho and other things. So we're going against some of the states that are trying to push to, in my opinion, violate the Second Amendment. We are pushing back on executive overreach, which usually comes through executive orders. But we haven't done a lot of just pushing back on legislation, which, and I'm not adverse to that. There just haven't been a lot of laws passed by this Congress. And that's the problem that we have, that because Congress is not passing these laws that the Biden administration in particular thinks that they should be passing, they go around the legislature or the Congress and they enact it in some sort of executive order.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Raul, appreciate that. That's exactly what I was looking for. Is, and granted, it's happened on both sides, but
yes.
The excessive executive order, I think, really is a problem. And appreciate the Second Amendment. That's something that Representative Boyle and I have worked hard on. And then lastly, thank you for pushing back on the EV As someone with a petroleum addiction and love for classic muscle cars, I appreciate that.
Thank you once again. We appreciate you coming to our committee and addressing us, and we appreciate what you do for our state.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Next committee, we have Julie Ellsworth, the Idaho State Treasurer. If you'll take the mic and again, give us your name and who you represent, even though we already announced it.
Look at all this stuff I'm going to, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not talking about. My name is Julie Ellsworth. I'm the Idaho State Treasurer. Is that all you need? Did that identify myself enough? Need my social security number. Board members of the committee, what a pleasure it is to come before you regularly and give you updates on and good news, feedback, things that we've been doing together for the last year and a half now. And we've had lots of good things. As I listened to the Attorney General, I thought how refreshing it is to, my goal as a treasurer and our group of treasurers that have been involved in pushing back against regulatory overreach. You know, if we didn't win the issue of the day, our goal was always to document what is happening because someday this is going to court. And I kind of think that day's here now on a lot of the issues, and I'll go into that. But when I last spoke to you, we were talking about the banking website for the state depository information because of the legislation that you passed, House Bill 190, that would allow me to ask companies if they are boycotting our industries. Since that time, you will see, Kristen, I think you had some attachments that I sent to every board member. You'll see that there's the banking letters is an attachment in that email that I sent you. It shows you the letters that we have developed for the website. We have run these by the Attorney General's office, and we have received no negative input from the banks that wish to do banking contracts with the state of Idaho. So if you wish to look at those letters, you'll see that we've included your information on boycotting Israel statute, as well as the information from House Bill 190 last year. We still have some follow-up that we're doing on the second issue that we talked to you about last session, about the mortgage rule. There is current legislation and different things being done on that in Congress, and I can get you more information on that as it arrives. And it is nice to see that there's a lot of energy to push back against these things now. We're not just the lone wolf back there. You have on your first attachment in that email, there is a letter that I attached where several state treasurers joined together to push back, or to just ask proxy voting entities. There's about 3 of them in the U.S., and they can control and swing how different companies end up with different boards of directors and different things. And so we wanted to ask them how they are determining to cast their vote, since they represent so many retirement and state funds within their purview of management. So we sent a letter to them, and that is the first letter. It says, the salient point is, we're asking you for the information on how you determine your vote, because public money is managed by asset manager firms who then look to your proxy advisory service to provide them the feedback. This seemed to be another way to get around on how to invest monies, what type of companies to invest in, and et cetera, by proxy voting through investments. So we didn't get a response back from them yet, but there's a nice questionnaire in there on things that we felt as treasurers you should take a look at. And this is an addendum in that attachment, and I find it very exciting. You know, it has to do with the management of money and accountability to the people whose money it is, which has been my fight from the very beginning. There's a second attachment that the treasurers got together, and we wrote To BlackRock. Larry Fink, he is the chairman and chief executive officer of BlackRock, and they manage a lot of retirement funds, and they're just basically an asset manager. And we wanted to specifically know, we are concerned that taxpayers' best long-term economic interests might have become subordinated to environmental, social, and political interests, often divorced from the shareholder value, and often pushed through shareholder proposals. So this is we're just trying to close up these loops that we're seeing that they're getting away around different laws and state mandates. So we wrote this letter again to BlackRock, and as usual, we usually get a response saying thank you and whatever. Well, it takes 4 or 5 pages when, to say that, but there was a lot of silence on our concern with BlackRock and the amount of money that they are working to get invested in certain ways for public interests. And our Attorney General mentioned some of the lawsuits that he gets involved in, but the Attorney General did sign on to a letter that I've included. It's your 3rd attachment, and our Attorney General did join that. And they asked the same question. But important for them to note that, if you are going beyond your prudent investor type charge, this could be an actionable item. And so we've on the 4th attachment, we've also written back to BlackRock. Yes, we see that now the attorneys general are looking for additional information, and we hope to get that answer, because it really does skew. And again, there is, in the very first attachment, it's a wonderful survey that makes you think about your fiduciary duty. And I think that it's very valuable to always mark down and document what is happening. And that's the purpose of these letters. And I'm certain we will get some type of response soon. Last letter, when was it? August 2nd. So we look forward to hearing about this and understanding exactly why 3 major proxy voting firms in the nation, what is their matrix for voting this proxy? When you ask the question, sometimes, like I said, you see a change in behavior. The 5th attachment that I have from you is a letter to the House of Representatives. Now, I know that things that are very exciting to me might not make people, they might think, yeah, you're for another world. But the National Association of Manufacturers wrote Congress, because the month of July was ESG month for the congressional hearings in the House. They were very powerful, and I enjoyed watching all of them. I would encourage you, we've provided a link for you on the 5th attachment. But these hearings, what encouraged me is that the questions being asked of the different entities that a year and a half ago we believed were trying to get around the public stated desire of legislatures, the questions are spot on the national level on these committees, and that's exciting. And we do share information with these committee members, but now we have the National Association of Manufacturers writing to them also, and they're on point. They recognize that, no, we can't just sit back and be quiet. And I'll tell you, those congressional hearings are worth your time. They have them categorized based on which topics came up, but they are engaged. And finally, I always give you I know I stand between you and adjournment, so I will tell you my last attachment, the Standard & Poor's attachment, which is number 6 in your file. I did email this to you. But this, again, is just a delight to see that Standard & Poor's backed off of their ESG report card quietly. And, I just think, yeah, we said that a year ago, didn't we? And that is a win for the state of Idaho, for your Idaho leadership, the way that we all signed on. If you'll see that letter, it has the governor, the attorney general, the controller, our U.S. senators, congressional leaders, House and Senate leadership. We were all on message with that. And again, the response was, thank you, 7 pages, and we're going to do this anyway. And, I thought, well, we'll just keep documenting, and they have pulled back from that. That is a big thing. That Standard & Poor's is no longer thinking that they can put an ESG report card. You might have felt the wind pushing back against all this. All of that is just how it should be. The people's voice through the legislative body is where you make policy, not in a boardroom. And I will stand for questions.
Committee, are there any questions? Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Treasurer Ellsworth, thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear that these things we're trying to pass and have been working on for a few years are having a good effect, and that more people are coming to them to change things. You said a change in behavior, and I've noticed there are now BlackRock ads with happy teachers union people on there saying how wonderful BlackRock is, and trying to spin, because as we've worked on these things, it's been effective with changing public opinion, I think, from some of these agencies. Yes. So thank you. Different topic, but still in your ballpark that I wanted to ask about. And as far as the digital dollar, have you been looking and working with that as far as how that might affect Idaho as the federal government continues to ruminate on that?
Okay, Representative, thank you for the question. I have talked to your co-chairs, Representative Boyle specifically through my office. We plan on doing a presentation in your next meeting exactly on that. And so the short answer is yes, we have very much looked into it. I have meetings in the next 2 weeks with other treasurers. I received an email just today from a legislator who's not present here who's concerned about it. I get all those. We are tracking it closely. And the thing that gives me comfort is yesterday I sat down with Senator Crapo's staff members that deal with banking and different things like that. And it's completely on their radar too. There's a real synergy in the state of Idaho leadership that these things, they can take hold if you're not paying attention.
Thank you. One more, Mr. Chairman. Similar to our ESG discussion and work that we've done, are you still looking for other things to protect consumers in the state? I know we as legislators are, but is there anything that may be at the forefront of your thought, or are we good at this point? It seems to be having a positive effect, but are there other things we might want to look at?
Well, Representative Dixon and Chairman, myself, me and my staff, we sat down and we wanted me to be brief.
I'm sorry.
So me and my staff, my alter ego. There are many, many issues, and our premise was always cut it off before they get it implemented, whereas you see, and then gather information, because if they need to be sued, they will. So there are many things that we see are flying in the face of, public policy that has been done through the front door. And I will keep you updated as I get the updates for them. There are things happening in Congress now that is just taking, like the mortgage issue, it's taking concerns that you had and it's putting it now in legislative format. That's not out yet, and so I need to wait and speak on it when I have consulted with my staff and we can be brief. There are many things, and I'm always involved in it. Yeah.
I see no further questions. We thank you for coming and being with us today, and we appreciate your brevity. Yes. And thank you so much.
To the point. No. Thank you.
Committee, is there any other discussion before we adjourn? If not, the Federalism Committee is adjourned.